Good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the May 8th, 2018 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. It is my privilege to call this meeting to order. There are copies of our agenda on either side of the room on the conveniently placed shelves. If you haven't already done so, I would encourage you to please pick up a copy and you can follow along with tonight's proceedings. There will be multiple opportunities for public comment, both with respect to the items that are on our agenda tonight, as well as a segment that is under item 4, which is reserved for public comments of a general nature. At that point in time, any members of the audience who have any questions or comments of a general nature with respect to things that are not on tonight's agenda, we would invite you to come up to the podium at that point in time, let us know who you are, and we'll welcome hearing from you. But first, it is our proud custom to begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, so we'd like to ask everyone present to please rise and join us in reciting the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Appreciate you joining us. With that, I would like to ask our fine village clerk, April Holden, to please call the roll.
Commissioner Wallace?
Here.
Commissioner Earl?
Here.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Here.
Commissioner White?
Here.
Commissioner Jose? Commissioner Barnett?
Here.
Mayor Tully?
Here. Thank you. Brings us to item 3, which pertains to minutes of prior council meetings. We have one set of minutes to approve tonight. Those are our minutes from our regular council meeting on May 1st, 2018. If there are no concerns, questions, comments, or otherwise, I would ask for a motion to approve, please.
I move the council approve the May 1st minutes as presented.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. And just like that, before your seat even got warm, we are at item 4, which is reserved for public comments of a general nature. So again, any members of the audience have any questions or comments of a general nature with respect to things that are not on tonight's agenda, please come down to the podium, introduce yourself to us, and we'll welcome hearing from you. Any questions or comments of a general nature? Good evening, welcome.
Thank you.
Normally we have a one person at a time rule, but we're gonna waive that. We're gonna waive that tonight.
My name is Chantel Smith, and I live at 4611 Drendel Road. I've been there for about 4 years now, and I wanted to discuss my disappointment in the village's decision to remove planned sidewalks on my street south of Indianapolis. I live on that specific block, and I'm concerned that the sidewalk plan recommended by TAP for safety and connectivity that was unanimously voted in favor for sidewalks in the entire neighborhood has been changed to eliminate those sidewalks on that south side of Drendel, based on a petition that doesn't have the support from all of the residents on my street. No sidewalks decreases the connectivity of our block from the school, golf course, Metra, just to name a few items in that area. It also decreases other pedestrian opportunities for safe, easy, walkable access to the prairie on that side of the street. I know my street's a dead end, but it doesn't eliminate the safety concern. There's still plenty of traffic from the 17 residents that live on that street, along with a lot of delivery drivers, mail carriers, and U-turns for those people who miss the sign that says this is a dead-end street. The traffic and safety concerns require my family and I to go to parking lots to teach my children how to ride something as simply as a bike because of the safety concerns around the traffic. What I believe sidewalks really bring is a sense of community. There are so many great families in our area, and connecting us together through sidewalks will make a big difference. Please reconsider putting sidewalks back on Drendel south of Indianapolis for the entire neighborhood's connectivity, safety, sense of community, and not all residents support this exception of that petition. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for, welcome back. Thank you very much for coming here and sharing that. As I suspect there may be some of your neighbors that are also here for the same purpose, let me just interject by saying that nothing has been finalized yet. What the village has been trying to do is, obviously there was a policy where we would only put a sidewalk there, a change in policy that only a sidewalk we put there if there was a request from the neighborhood. There was a request from the neighborhood. So a proposal was made to put a sidewalk there, but as just about everything that we do, before we act, we put it out there for input, and we received some input. It turns out, as you recognize, there are some people who are very much against sidewalks going into your neighborhood, which puts us in an odd position of not wanting to pit neighbor against neighbor, because obviously we want to have We want to live up to our reputation as one of the friendliest communities in America, so we don't want to revisit a situation where neighbors are against neighbors, and how do you solve that? So and there were also some other items that were introduced into this mix. It's the impact of a sidewalk upon certain environmentally protected areas that are nearby. We had to take in some of that information. So what you saw was the village's attempt to try to put together a plan that would try to address the competing and divergent input that we received. And we had hoped that it might accommodate enough people, or as they say, make everyone equally unhappy, as the definition of a good settlement. So clearly there are people that are going to be unhappy no matter what we do, but as I understand it, prior to actually putting this out for bids, our staff is going to prepare a council meeting agenda so that this can come before us to approve a project scope and design. And so this is not finalized. What you saw was a plan that was an attempt to try to accommodate multiple and divergent perspectives on this issue. We don't like to be in the position of an arbiter of what people should have and shouldn't have. Ideally, we'd like the neighborhood to be unified. It is not. So we're doing the best we can to accommodate those divergent and competing interests, as well as some other interests that are involved in this area that impact this project. We actually heard from some other governmental bodies about this project. We've gotten a fair amount of input. So we're going to continue to try to navigate this the best we can. We would like to work with everybody involved and reach an outcome that everybody can be proud of and live with. So I guess that's a long way of my saying thank you, stay tuned.
Yes, thank you.
We're going to continue to try to address this, understanding that I'm sure we're not going to be able to make everyone happy, because if you try to make everyone happy, all you do is displease no one. I mean, you please no one.
Right.
But
Okay.
so that's, I just want to let everyone know that's where things currently stand.
Okay, I'll see you again then.
I
Thanks.
look forward to it. Thank you. Other questions or comments of a general nature?
I'm not quite sure if you want to continue to hear this, but
Of course.
my name is
Welcome.
Jackie Olkowitz. I live at 4506 Drundle. I'm just north of Indianapolis on the same street as my neighbor. I just want to reiterate again our desire for connectivity in our neighborhood. I think right now the neighborhood feels very disjointed. I think a lot of the considerations, particularly that we're pushing for, are around the safety piece and the access piece. I know some of our residents or neighborhood residents that are concerned about the effect it has on the rustic feel of the neighborhood. And I think bringing connectivity and doing it in a way that allows people to really truly enjoy the prairie and have access from our side of the neighborhood, which we do not. We have to walk down the street, which my neighbor that just spoke reiterated the safety concerns there. There are a lot of young children in this neighborhood. I don't think that was the case a few years ago. There continue to be more and more children. You continue to see more and more people walking in the street. So wanted to reiterate that, and then also talk about or make a point of consideration what happens to those children that live on that block from a bus perspective. Those of us in the neighborhood that are going to receive sidewalks from this project, I understand will be, how our children will have safe access to the grade school in the area. Those children that live on that block that won't have a sidewalk, will the buses then still have to come and pick up those children? So I think that that's a point of consideration. There's a number of children that live on that specific piece of the street. Winter especially is very, very dangerous. When the plows come through, the plows make walking along the side of the road impossible. Our children have to walk in the street in order to commute anywhere in the neighborhood, down to the prairie and or to school or to the bus stop specifically. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do appreciate that there are many different perspectives on this. No one, by the way, is wrong. Everybody has valid points. We will try to do the best we can to make everyone least unhappy and try to achieve a good outcome here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, welcome.
Hi, my name is Carol Lupi. I live on 4619 Drundle, also in the block that's being impacted. I want to thank the village for addressing the stormwater concerns that we have there. That's a huge thing. It's not an ideal situation to have to call your boss and let them know you can't make it to work because you can't get out of your driveway. So I appreciate the village taking on this enormous project and helping those of us who live on that block out. But I also want to address the women who spoke at the meeting on February 20th about our neighborhood and wanting to have the sidewalks removed as well. First of all, I disagree with the fact that they don't think there's pedestrian traffic, a lot of pedestrian traffic in our area. We have neighbors who walk their dogs. We also have folks who come down from the professional buildings off of Ogden Avenue on their lunch breaks to walk down in our street. As previously mentioned by my neighbor, we have delivery trucks. We have people who make U-turns on our street and speed out quicker than when they came in when they realize they can't get out. So we do have a safety concern there with our pedestrian traffic and our vehicular traffic on our block. The rustic feel that was also mentioned by the neighbors on February 20th doesn't address the safety concerns that have been identified through the surveys done in our neighborhood. Our kids need and deserve a safe place to walk either to school, to the bus stop, or to each other's houses. Neighbors who are walking their dogs need and deserve a safe place to walk in our neighborhood. Also, our neighbors who want to walk to the Belmont train station need and deserve a safe place to walk. Neighbors who want and have a stroller or little ones or just want to take an evening stroll in our neighborhood deserve and need a safe place to walk. I want to thank you for your time and consideration. I hope that you can see that we're not just concerned about our current status, but we're thinking about what our neighborhood is going to look like in 5 years, 10 years, and even 50 years from now. And the sidewalks in our area are going to be a huge part in playing that role in the connectivity in our neighborhood to the train station, to the schools, and just to and from each other's houses safely. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Other questions or comments from members of the audience of a general nature with respect to things not on tonight's agenda? Good evening, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Aaron Cates, 2537 Indianapolis Avenue, another first neighbor over there. I'm just going to point to several people we have and try to summarize as best I can. I think that we need the sidewalks for safety reasons, we need connectivity reasons, all the reasons that were mentioned. But you talked about a compromise and how that was important. And I think that's what we did, spending 2 years speaking with our neighbors, all being here in this building. And we came up with a plan that would work for everybody. A plan that included drainage, a plan that included resurfacing the roads, and a plan that included sidewalks. Not everybody needed sidewalks or wanted sidewalks. Not everybody needed or wanted drainage. Not everybody needed or wanted widening of the road. But I think we came up with a plan that was comprehensive, that everybody could get behind. And now after spending 2 years going through multiple meetings, we've removed what was initially brought forth with the petition in the first place. So what I want to ask is that we really reconsider this and understand that the compromise has already been made and that we think that everybody should be happy with what's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Other questions or comments of a general nature from members of the audience? All right, well, very good. Well, thanks to all those who came and shared their comments with us. It's always welcome and appreciated. That brings us then to item 5, which is our consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Martelli, I move the council approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to any items on tonight's consent agenda? Any questions or comments from members of the village council? Hearing none, may I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Earl? Aye. Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. The consent agenda passes unanimously. That brings us to item 6, which is our active agenda. We have two items on tonight's active agenda. First, do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance authorizing a loan agreement with the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency?
Martelli, I move that this council adopt an ordinance to authorize a loan agreement with the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency as presented.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to this item? Any questions or comments from members of the village council? May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Earl? Aye. Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. That matter passes unanimously and brings us to item 6B as in boy. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance amending the rates charged for water?
Martelli, I move that this council adopt an ordinance to amend the rates charged for water as presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments from members of the audience? Questions or comments from members of the village council? Commissioner Barnett?
Just a reminder to everybody that this rate increase is essentially a pass-through. It's a function of the DuPage Water Commission's rate increase, which I think is Chicago as well.
Yes.
It kind of all goes downhill, so to speak, and we're at the end of the line.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Hearing none, may I have a roll call on this item, please?
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace? Aye. Commissioner Earl? Aye. Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. The matter passes unanimously. I bring this to the end of our active agenda and on to our first reading or our workshop agenda, which is item 7. We have several items for discussion tonight. Our workshop or our first reading agenda is a little bit different than the active agenda you just witnessed. These items are presented for discussion and consideration purposes only. No final action will be taken tonight. We change things up a little bit and make it a little less formal. Typically, we'll ask a member of the village staff to present these items. The council will ask questions first, then we'll throw it out to the audience for any questions or comments, and then we'll come back to the village council. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to our village manager, David Fieldman, for introduction of the items on tonight's first reading agenda.
Thank you, Mayor Tully. There are 4 items on tonight's first reading agenda. The first is consideration of a resolution granting historic landmark designation for the property at 1323 Maple Avenue. And here to present background information on this petition is our Community Development Director, Stan Popovich.
Good evening, Mr. Popovich.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, council members. As Manager Philman noted, the first item is historic landmark designation at 1323 Maple Avenue. The property is a little bit southwest of downtown Downers Grove here on Maple Avenue on the south side of the street. You can see it here outlined in blue. It's a little bit north of the intersection of 55th Street there as well. The historic landmark for consideration is a bungalow architectural style home. Bungalows were built in the village of Downers Grove between about 1890 and 1930. This property was built circa 1924. It's a 1.5-story home with a low-pitched roof with some deep overhangs, as shown in the picture. That's pretty common in a Chicago bungalow. It also has an offset recessed entry on the east side, which is on the left side of this picture. That's common in prairie bungalows. And then it also has a dark tapestry brick, 3/1 windows, and a changing in massing as well, which is unique as well to this house. So it's a sort of a potpourri of a bungalow home with some items from all different styles of bungalows. But it's a really good example of a bungalow. The detached garage for the applicant's request is also part of the proposal and has similar characteristics to the house with the hip roof and then the 3/1 windows, which are a little hard to see in this picture, but they're on the right-hand side of the picture there. It meets the criteria for landmark. It was built in circa 1924, and it's a good example of a bungalow style. If the council were to approve this, this will be the 22nd landmark. If there's any questions that you have tonight, Mayor, Council, I'd be happy to answer those for you tonight.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and first and foremost, thank you very much to the Millers for bringing this forward for consideration for landmarking. We are always grateful to see residents embrace historic preservation and celebration as much as we try to encourage, both through the village as well as our partnerships with not-for-profit organizations in town that are also equally committed to celebrating and educating with respect to historic preservation. So I'll get off my soapbox. Questions or comments from the council? Any questions or comments from members of the audience? Good evening, welcome.
Good evening. Amy Gasson, 5320 Benton Avenue. I just wanted to express my support for granting historic landmark designation to the home and the detached garage at 1323 Maple Avenue. And I also wanted to just say that Carol and David Miller, the homeowners, were unable to be here tonight, but they are very much excited about this and have been wanting to do it for a while. So thank you.
Terrific. Thank you for sharing that. Other questions or comments on the item? Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. Rick Pellavani, 6825 Camden in Downers Grove. I also stand in support of this nomination. And even though the consideration is only for the exterior of the house, I had the occasion of actually being in this house. And it's just wonderful. They've taken the architectural beauty of the outside, and that was translated into the inside as well. They've actually retained those features of the house. So it's a gem that needs to be saved for posterity. And as Stan mentioned, this is a unique home in that it was a custom home, but it does have elements of Chicago craftsman style bungalow, prairie style, which makes it even more unique. The tapestry brick is related to the deeper texture the brick and the fact that it goes all the way around the house. So would appreciate your support.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Other questions or comments from members of the audience? Any final questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Very good. Thank you. Next item, please.
Next item is an ordinance which would amend the wine boutique liquor license classification. And here to present information on this item is our village attorney, Enza Petrarca.
Good evening, Ms. Petrarca.
Good evening, Mayor. The next item is an ordinance amending the wine boutique liquor license classification. The proposed ordinance amends the ordinance requiring that the primary business of this license be the sale of wine, and instead would require the primary business to be the sale of wine and or beer. The ordinance is further amended to remove the requirement that food be prepared at the establishment and instead would only require that food service be available. This would eliminate the requirement for a facility to actually have a kitchen and allow them to sell prepackaged and catered food items so long as they're sold, and served on the premise for on-site consumption. The Liquor Commission discussed this item at their April 5th meeting and forwarded a favorable recommendation. However, they did also recommend the removal of the food service item altogether. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Answer any questions.
Thank you. Appreciate it. This was an item that actually came forward because, as we see, there's always new opportunities to encourage businesses in town. We, for a long time, had a wine boutique ordinance that's functioned very effectively in town. A lot of residents and visitors alike have taken advantage of it. And the idea was to basically allow the very same thing except with craft beer. And there are other business models like this that are around. So that was one piece of it, which is pretty straightforward. The other piece was the concept of almost all of our liquor licenses require that food be available for purchase, and for some of these, because of the kitchen requirements and the DuPage County Health Code, it makes it very difficult for them to prepare the food on site. But there's no reason why the food couldn't be prepared somewhere else and be sold and made available to patrons on site. That is another model that I think we've seen in many different places around the Chicago metropolitan area. So these are the two motivating reasons why we suggested these changes be considered by the Liquor Commission as part of our process, and now it's back to us. I would note that the Liquor Commission was fully in favor of what we asked them to consider, but then took up another topic of what food requirements in various different licenses. And my only comment is that if the council at some point would like to take that up, perhaps it was a better topic of long-range planning, because it's a major undertaking to review that requirement for all of our licenses across the entire village. And I'm not sure that's something that we need to take up in the context of this particular request, but I understand there may be some interest potentially in looking at that. I don't know if there is or not. I'm not necessarily asking people for their answer to that question. I would just suggest if there is, that it would be probably more appropriately something we'd have to designate for a project for long-range planning, because I suspect it would be a fairly involved process. So with that, obviously, since I suggested that we make these changes, I'm fully in support of them. Other questions or comments from the council? Commissioner White?
I also support moving forward with this ordinance, and I wouldn't want to postpone the consideration of this specific instance in the context of larger considerations. I really don't know where I would come on food in general, but I don't want that to be a part of this deliberation.
Thank you. Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you, Mayor. Since this is a workshop, I'd like to take full advantage of the workshop first reading format. I think sometimes we get caught up in auxiliary issues regarding alcohol, and I'd like to start by reading section 3.2, the purpose. And here we go. It is the policy of the village to limit the sale and service of alcoholic liquor in accordance with the terms and conditions of this ordinance and state law. Further, in promotion of the public safety and well-being, it is the policy of the village to limit the purchase, consumption, and possession of alcohol liquor in order to prevent intoxication, disorderly conduct, trespasses, unruly disturbance of public and private assembly, traffic accidents, and similar conduct which often result from the unlawful or excessive purchase, consumption, or possession of alcoholic liquor. And in addition to that, there's also a certain cultural aspect when the council and the liquor commission consider applications. We must keep that in mind. And when I first got on council, before myself, the Downers Grove had a reputation of being dry. By the time I got on council, the big debate was the establishment providing more food than alcohol? And they would actually check receipts to make sure that the establishment was more food than alcohol. Then we started getting into other things like the size of the servings, training of the owner and the staff, who had control of the liquor, who had sight of the liquor, and the size, like I say, the size of the steins, who poured the pitchers, even how warm the beer was when served in long tubes. And we started, I think, getting away from the purpose of the ordinance. Let's get down here a little bit. Try to cut off some of my comments that were going to be rather long, but I think we kind of got off the track a little bit, and it's not so much the where the liquor comes from. That's not in the ordinance. So whether it's prepared on site or whether it's hauled in by horses, by Belgian horses from St. Louis, doesn't make any difference. We do know that food has a strong effect on the service of alcohol and preventing intoxication and misuse. It's not just the amount of alcohol, but also the existence of food. I mean, there's some people that get smashed on 2 glasses of wine. So food is important, and I think it helps in enforcing the purpose and policy of the village ordinances. Where food comes from is not part of the purpose of the ordinance either. So whether it comes from the kitchen or whether it's prepared on site or brought in for sale is an important aspect too. So it doesn't matter where the food actually comes from. I know Alter Brewing, we started out with restaurants. They wanted alcohol because alcohol helped improve their business. Places, a brewery like Alter Brewing, found out that just having the alcohol and not having food was a detriment to the business, and essentially that's why we changed our food truck ordinance, is to kind of help bring food into to Alter Brewing. So as the mayor suggested, I would like to go ahead and bring this into long-term planning and let the Liquor Commission know that food is an important aspect. How we don't have any rules that define, we say sale, but that, I think what we're trying to avoid is having the serving of alcohol in places where you can just order a pizza. So I think we need to tighten up the rules so that we are providing food either in a kitchen or stored on site somehow. We should tighten that up a bit and approach that, as you say, Mayor, and long-term planning, and let the Liquor Commission have discussion. But I would like to see food remain as part of it, and not so much where the alcohol comes from, but the actual, pay attention to the sale and possession rather than the origination of the alcohol, which isn't in the ordinance at all, which isn't in the purpose and policy of the ordinance at all. So thank you for that, Mayor, and look forward to further discussion along the line.
Thank you. My only concern is that right now, only 2 of our ordinances do not currently require food, and I'm very reluctant and puzzled to explore removing the food requirement from from any of our ordinances. I think they ought to just stay the way they are. And the current petitioner, not to get off track here, isn't suggesting that it be removed, which is why I was puzzled with the recommendation to remove a requirement that, for all the reasons you just gave, is actually important to keep. Which is why I think at the bottom, everyone's in support of this particular petition. I personally don't think we need to revisit the food requirement because, for all the reasons you stated, it serves a good purpose. And ultimately, the most important objective of all of our liquor control ordinances is the responsible sale and consumption of alcohol within our community, which is something we take very seriously. I take very seriously. And I think we've done a pretty good job of making sure that that objective has been achieved. At the same time, and if we can do that at the same time, fostering a vibrant economic environment in our community and encourage people to open up businesses that our residents and visitors alike enjoy, and we can do that in a responsible way true to our mission, then I think that's something that is all in the public good. But again, perhaps for another time.
Mayor, if I may inject one more thing.
You may inject away.
I forgot to mention that I do support this measure.
That's an important thing to inject.
Yes, it is. I didn't want to leave that out. Thanks.
There was a purpose to my diatribe. It allowed you to... Any other questions or comments from the council?
I support this.
Commissioner Earl supports this. Commissioner Barnett's going to speak.
Yeah, briefly, Mayor, I support it as well. I want to thank the petitioner as well as our Liquor Commission. One of the things that's going on in our liquor license evolution, as Bill alluded to, is a lot of change, and it's really to try and reflect the economy around us. The fact of the matter is our community has to be driven by economic development, and a piece of that is restaurants, liquor serving establishments, and how they can and can't grow or start or expand within our community is really important. So this body and the Liquor Commission's willingness over the last 15 years at least or so, Mayor, to do this kind of thing. Hear the stories of those that want to start businesses, hear the stories of those that want to come to our community and try and find a way to accommodate them while still being respectful of our residents and respectful of our strong desire to maintain a good environment is important. And so there's a lot of good work being done way beyond just this dais to try and consider these things and put them into a format that we can listen to and hear about up here. So thank you to the Liquor Commission in particular for their work on this and the petitioner.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments? Commissioner Wallace.
I am also in favor of this amendment. I enjoy the fact that changing this potentially brings new and different businesses to our town. That is all.
Thank you. Questions or comments from members of the audience? Seeing no violent objection, any final questions from members of the council? All right, very good. We'll see this at a future meeting. Next item, please.
Next item is an ordinance that would amend provisions of Chapter 9 regarding the Office of Emergency Management, and Enzo will present this item as well.
Hello again, Ms. Petrarca.
Hello. The next ordinance is basically a housekeeping ordinance. The amendment has been updated to accurately reflect the role of the Office of Emergency Management. It also clarifies the powers and duties of the mayor and the village manager during a disaster or civil emergency. The proposed amendments are consistent with both state law and the village's current practice. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Questions from the audience? Very good. Next item, please.
The last item on tonight's first reading agenda is a motion authorizing the execution of a contract for the 2018 street resurfacing. Here to present information on this item is our Public Works Director, Nan Newland.
Good evening, Ms. Newland.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm here to present an item. This is award of contract for our 2018 street resurfacing contract. This is award to K5 Construction in the amount of $2,792,999.76. We typically present to you 2 contracts each year for street maintenance. This year we're consolidating those into one contract, and this is the contract. There are 35 street segments included, and I just have a separate slide to show you for each group of them, so you try to make them large enough to see. They're also on our website for residents to see. Residents on these streets will be receiving letters from us letting them know about the upcoming construction, and the work will include removal of some curb and gutter, remove and replacement, some patching, grinding an overlay of all these streets that are shown on these 3 lists. We did go out to bid for this contract. There were 3 bidders, and K5 was the low bidder. They have done several projects for the village in the last few years and have performed well, and we do recommend approval of this contract to K5. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from members of the council? Any questions or comments from members of the audience? Very good. Thank you.
That ends our first reading tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings us to item 9, which is the mayor's report. And I couldn't get to it before Ms. Newland left, but of course I first have to publicly acknowledge our Public Works Director for recently being named one of the top 10 public works directors in the entire country by the American Public Works Association. Ms. Newland, congratulations, has been identified as one of the top 10 public works leaders of the year 2018. Every year there are nationally 10 different public works leaders that are honored during national ceremonies, and we think that that is, first of all, no surprise, because we've known for a long time that you were a superstar, and it's about time the rest of the country finally caught up and realized that as well. So we look forward to celebrating a remarkable achievement, well-deserved and hard-earned locally, and congratulations again on what is a very, very significant and impressive career milestone. Well, congratulations to you on that. The next thing I want to report on is we all know the Emmys, we know the Grammys, we know the Oscars. But the most significant award event that takes place that I'm aware of is, of course, the Cornerstone Awards, which are awarded annually at the Downers Grove Economic Development Corporation's annual luncheon, which is taking place this year on May 11th, 2018, from 11 a.m. until 1:30 p.m. This is an annual event that grows in size and significance every year. Talking about economic development, it's an opportunity to celebrate a very important aspect of what we do as a municipality in conjunction with the private sector, as well as other not-for-profit and public entities, in order to create and maintain a vibrant economic environment here in our community, which goes a long ways towards helping sustain and maintain this as a wonderful place to live. The recipients of the Cornerstone Awards I am unable to reveal at this point in time because they are kept in a sealed envelope by the accounting firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howell, only to be revealed at the luncheon itself. But it is a significant award of recognizing major economic development projects that have taken place in the prior year. So if you looking forward to that red carpet luncheon, and it's not really red carpet, but it's more yellow construction tape, but it's a terrific event, and we look forward to it later this year. And then last but not least, I want to in advance wish a very happy Mother's Day, both to Commissioner Earl and Commissioner Wallace, as well as all the moms in the audience and all those at home. Happy Mother's Day. And that's the end of my report, which then brings us to item 9, which is the village attorney's report. Ms. Petrarca, back to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Only 2 items to present tonight. The first is an ordinance amending the wine boutique liquor license classification and an ordinance amending provisions of Chapter 9, Office of Emergency Management. Both will be on next week's active agenda. Thank you. That is all.
Thank you very much. That then brings us to item 10, which is reserved for village council member reports. This is an opportunity for members of the village council to either share with those in the audience items of interest and other goings-on in the community, or to report out to their colleagues in the community with respect to their roles as liaisons to other public bodies. Tonight, I will start to my far left and ask if Commissioner Barnett has any report.
I do not, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Earl.
No report, Mayor.
Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you, Mayor. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there in the village. And congratulations to Nan. I served with her on the Transportation Policy Committee in the DMMC, and she has a lot of respect there. It's easy to tell. It's great that she has national recognition. However, it would have been nice to keep her as our best-kept secret. But that's the way it goes. Congratulations, Nan. Otherwise, no report. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Wallace.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a quick report. As a member of the Downers Grove Rotary Club, I'm really excited to mention that we were featured in West Suburban Living for Rotary Grove Fest, along with Rib Fest from Naperville, Swedish Days and Festival of the Vine of Geneva. And our own Slavik Polinsky's picture that he took is also on the cover. So that was some awesome recognition. And then I also want to wish a happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there in the village. You know how difficult it is, but how rewarding it is as well. So enjoy the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And there are, in fact, only 44 days left until Rotary Grove Fest hits the streets of Downers Grove. And the weather's finally looking like it's summer festival weather. Commissioner White.
No report.
And I have no further report, but I'm going to pause and ask a question. I'm assuming, just on a wild hunch, that most of the people that are still here are here for the stormwater regulation discussion that is scheduled to take place across the hallway in the committee room. Is that correct? By show of hands, how many are sticking around for that? You may have noticed that this committee room is not as large as the number of people that we have in this room. So if we can intrude upon your patience, what we would normally do is recess our meeting for about 5-10 minutes and we would go across the hallway. There is not room for this many people for that discussion. So what we are going to do is instead remain here. But because of that logistical change, we're going to need about 5-10 minutes in order to bring the visual materials into here so that everyone can see them. So if you would bear with us, we will take a short recess. I will ask for a motion to take a short recess, and then we will reconvene right here in approximately 5-10 minutes. Let's say 10 minutes. What's a 10%, 20% contingency on any project? Should we just go with that? And then we'll pick up that discussion here, if you don't mind.
I move the council recess for a time period between 5 and 10 minutes.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. We are recessed for about 5 or 10 minutes. Don't go away. We'll be back and pick up that discussion here. Thank you. Here than in the much smaller room. So we appreciate your patience. We are reconvening our meeting, and this segment of the agenda is item 11. It's the manager's report. Our manager being David Fieldman, who you've already met. Mr. Fieldman, appreciate if you would introduce the item for discussion, which is an ongoing conversation with respect to potential amendments to our stormwater management regulations.
Thank you. I'm going to do the Phil Donahue imitation tonight. He was a TV personality from the 80s, if you don't. But, he's with the mobile mic. We'll try to work off whiteboards on the screen. They are visible slightly here as well, although they're a little dark. The issue, as the mayor said, is that code-compliant development generates stormwater runoff, which sometimes negatively affects adjacent properties. So that's been a long-time issue here in the village of Downers Grove, and we've been working incrementally over the years to address it, and we are doing that again here tonight over a series of meetings, and there will be no ordinances passed tonight or decisions made tonight. We really want to get more input from the stakeholders, and I see a lot of neighbors, residents, and members of the builder community here tonight. So we're two objectives with this project. The first objective is the obvious one, try to reduce the negative impacts of that stormwater runoff created by development activities. But also a second objective, which comes right from our comprehensive plan, which is that we should always have a building permitting process which can accommodate residential renovation and redevelopment. So we want to continue to encourage investment in our neighborhoods. So those are the two objectives with this project. We have many challenges with stormwater here in the village, and they are enumerated here on the picture of the whiteboard. First and foremost is there are several areas in our village that lack modern stormwater systems and infrastructure. Some have informal systems, some have no systems at all. We are also seeing development pressures and development activities in these very neighborhoods that are underserved. And we have some interesting challenges with our rolling topography in some areas, creating large puddles or LPDAs, localized poor drainage areas. We also have areas in town which are incredibly flat, where water just sits and doesn't run off at all. Also unique to Downers Grove as a challenge is our soil conditions. A lot of the soils throughout our village have high clay content, and what that means is water does not infiltrate or percolate well into the ground. It goes a couple inches deep and just sits there in a lot of areas in our village. One of the other challenges I wanted to highlight in this project is it really is a trade-off and a challenge to try to balance the two project objectives of reducing the negative impacts of runoff while still allowing development activities to occur. So the Village Council, staff, members of our Stormwater Floodplain Oversight Committee have been at this project for well over a year now. And at the last council meeting, the council gave staff direction on 2 points. Number one, prepare a draft ordinance for consideration, and we have done that. And also engage with our real estate development or builder community, the local home builders, architects, engineers, to present the ordinance to them and get their feedback for consideration before we go any further. We did both of those. We had our meeting with the builder community a couple Tuesdays ago, and many comments were presented that afternoon, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to put them into 3 major categories. The first thing we heard from this group is that the village should construct a modern stormwater system funded by all residents, noting that this is a long-time community-wide issue, and really it goes right to that first challenge, lack of infrastructure throughout our village. So first comment was this could be addressed by building a system throughout the village. The second general comment was the regulations that are proposed in the draft ordinance will negatively impact property values throughout the village and generally the housing economy. And therefore the number of new houses and additions undertaken will decrease. And the final major point we took away from that meeting was that the detention basins that are contemplated with these draft regulations will not effectively manage the stormwater for a variety of technical reasons, primarily due to the soil conditions that I mentioned earlier. So I wanted to briefly explain, for those of you who aren't familiar, the key terms of the draft ordinance that has been put forward. The key points first, stormwater detention would be required for every new single-family house and every what we call major addition to an existing single-family house. And a major addition would be any addition which expands the footprint of the house and alters at least 600 square feet. So that 600 square feet could be all addition, or it could be a small addition with some interior remodel to the existing portion. So that would be a definition of a major addition. And that detention that would be required for these 2 types of projects, if you can connect your detention basin to our public system by gravity, meaning no pumps, water can flow downhill into our system, and as long as our public system is within 200 feet, you would provide what we call 100% storage volume, which is the engineer's prescribed amount. If you were in a situation where you could not feasibly connect to our public system because it's too far away, i.e. more than 200 feet, or because you can't get it to work by gravity and would otherwise need a pump, then you would have to upsize the basin to provide more storage in an amount at 110% to 150% in that range, and that range would vary based on your effectiveness in your basin due to soil conditions and infiltration rates. There are 2 other components to the draft ordinance. One is a removal of a local amendment regarding what we call best management practices, rain gardens, dry wells. This would be removed from our code and would revert back to the DuPage County-wide code. They would only have to be installed when you would build something that resulted in 2,500 square feet of more impervious area. That would undo an amendment we made in, I think, 2014. And the last key point, for all the other types of projects not described herein, detention would be required once 5,000 square feet of new impervious area were put on a site. So that's mainly for commercial areas. We wanted to address one of the 3 major concerns that the building community alerted us to, and that is, will these basins be effective? Will they actually work? And to do that, we analyzed 21 soil reports that we had on file from those BMP requirements of a couple years ago. And in analyzing just those 21 data points, we think that about 60% of the properties in the village have what we'll call, for this purpose, good infiltration rates, which leaves about 40% of the properties that we think will have poor or bad infiltration rates. And when you apply this distribution to the type of development we're expecting, here's what we think. We think that about 60% of the basins that would be built into this ordinance are probably going to work, likely to perform as designed. About 15% of them are likely not really to work at all. They won't perform well.
And the reason for that is because water won't infiltrate well in these systems, and they won't be connected to our public system. They're basically going to fill up with water all the way to the top within probably 30 to 90 days, and they'll stay like that, and therefore they won't be effective. Which leaves about 25% of the basins which we think are likely to perform at less than design capacity, but they will function, just the degree of which is a question. So they will fill partially up. They'll fill up to the level of an outlet pipe in the basin, which is going to be dependent on the elevation of our public system. So 60% we think will work as designed, 15% really won't work at all, and 25% will perform at some level in between. So that is a brief summary of this project, Mayor. Really what we're looking for here tonight is some dialogue and further direction as to what next steps you would like us to take in this project.
Sure, and appreciate that summary of where we've been and where we're going. As the village manager mentioned, we're not making a final decision on anything tonight. Nothing's being voted on. This is it's another step in what I suspect will be a process that has some time to go before it will be resolved. This is also not unexpected. I think even in our earlier meetings when we were looking at this issue and we were contemplating different approaches, there was a lot more than what the village manager described that we looked at possibly pursuing, and we ended up trying to pick something that would work and be simple. And I know a number of folks in the audience were at some of those meetings, and so you know the journey that we took to kind of even get to this point. But all along, we knew that we were going to be putting this out for broader input, and in fact inviting people who are out there in the field working with these things on a day-to-day basis to get that input. And there would be some different and new information that might impact how we go about this. And these are some pretty important things, because the last thing we want to do is put something into place that costs a heck of a lot of money and doesn't work. That would be a disaster. And we had a prior set of solutions that the manager mentioned that included rain gardens and other things that we took that were relatively inexpensive and were aimed at trying to resolve some of these issues, and they didn't work at all. And that's why they're being removed from the ordinance, or they didn't work, by and large they didn't work. So we have tried to go about this different ways. Obviously you want to go for the simplest things and the least expensive solutions first before you start getting into complicated things that cost a lot of money. That just makes sense. But we are committed to trying to improve this situation, but we're trying to do it in a way that's right, if you will, or relatively right, proportionally to all the different considerations that are involved. But also we want to strike this balance, and this is something I think the very first meeting we had on this topic was, yes, we want to achieve the objective here, which is to eliminate creating new stormwater problems through new construction and renovations and additions. But on the other hand, we don't want to handicap our community in terms of its growth and desirability, because that's going to not only hurt it from that perspective, but it will hurt those here right now in terms of property values and desirability of the community. We don't want to jeopardize that, and it is a balancing act. Some of you will remember, some of you may not, that this is something we've done before. Maybe 10, 15 years ago. Was it that long ago? It was 10 years ago. There was a lot of what would be called, some called them teardowns, some called it residential redevelopment, but there was a cry for a lot of changes to setbacks and fencing on property and height restrictions and floor area ratios. There were all various different requirements. Total lot width you could build on, a lot of different things that were considered as a reaction to a phase of residential redevelopment because of the desirability of people to build in Downers Grove. That's a good thing. You want people to come to your town. It also helps your property values when other people want to come here, because the market conditions make it more desirable and people want to, so the value goes up. But we encountered the same type of situation where there were a lot of different things that were discussed. We sat down with the development community to try to figure out what was practical, what was impractical, because it's just doing something for the sake of doing it, if it doesn't work, is not a good idea. And we ended up with something over a period of time, which may have seemed like forever to some people, but we eventually arrived upon a set of residential redevelopment regulations, which are largely in place still today, with some modifications, that have gone far towards addressing a lot of the issues that were identified back then. This is very similar, except we're talking about stormwater. And we're going to get through this process, and we're going to find an outcome that is not going to be perfect, but we don't want perfect to be the enemy of good. We want to get to something that achieves the goal in a way that doesn't cause more harm or as much harm as we're trying to solve. So we're continuing to take input from all those who are interested in this topic understanding that it is the entire community that we serve, and we have to look at all the different pros and cons and how this affects the village, in addition to the more immediate house by lot, neighborhood by neighborhood stormwater impacts. So we're really glad to see all of you here tonight. The fact that we're having this here instead of the committee room is great, because this is what it takes to solve these issues. It really takes community involvement from diverse and sometimes competing perspectives. But we're going to try to work through this all together, and I'm confident we can, because as I mentioned with residential redevelopment regulations about a decade ago, we did that, and we were able to do it pretty reasonably, and there are folks who have been building under those regulations ever since, and we haven't destroyed property values in the town, and yet we've made improvements. So we'll get there. So with that sort of introduction, I'd like to open it up to my colleagues, because we're seeing a lot of this new information about the impact that was received, not the impact, the feedback that was received from the meetings with the development community more recently, and we're still kind of reacting to it as well. So I will just stop there and ask my colleagues to jump in and comment as they wish, and then we'll turn it over to members of the audience who may wish to comment as well. Again, we're not making any final decisions tonight. This is a continuation of a process where we want to take an input and try to achieve that elusive goal that I described a moment ago. Who wants to go first? Commissioner Barnett.
Thanks, Mayor. I hate this setting. I like it better when we're talking to each other a little more. One of the things that strikes me about the current proposed ordinance is there's a misalignment. I think we're kind of missing alignment of costs and benefits. It strikes me that what happens here under this sort of scenario that would likely play out is we would basically be putting the cost of, or the burden associated with public infrastructure improvements on private property. The basin requirements, the storage requirements for the types of events that we're talking about are above and beyond what most parcels are doing now. So we kind of started this conversation, or at least I was focused, my mind was focused on the idea of sort of net change, zero net change, not doing any harm. And what would happen under the current ordinance, I think, is in many cases we would be forcing a property owner to improve to such a degree that they were improving their entire neighborhood. They were making a material improvement in all of their neighbors' properties, or at least all their adjacent neighbors' properties. And that's a burden way beyond what in my mind is the goal. You know, the goal of sort of surface nuisance runoff, when one small house sits on a lot and becomes surrounded by 4 new ones with a lot more coverage and suddenly has water problems, this goes way beyond that. And so I'm concerned and frankly not comfortable with that balance. The other thing that kind of gives me pause is we've got a stormwater utility, and whether you like the utility or don't like the utility, it's how we've collectively decided we're going to fund our stormwater efforts. There's a real misalignment, if you will, between this concept and the way we charge for a utility. So for all the residents in town, we're charging largely based on impervious area. It's a big approximation, but that's largely what it is. This gets way afield of that. And so there becomes a disconnect between our ordinances about building and development and the methods by which we assess stormwater utility rates. And I think that's potentially a long-term problem for the community. The one thing I would say, I've heard for years now, a lot of folks say to me, just build the stormwater system we need. And nobody up here is going to disagree with that, I suspect, and probably nobody out there would, but some perspective on the magnitude of that is important. In roughly 11 years, we've done, help me, $30 million worth of stormwater work.
$30 million, 60 projects.
And the magnitude of the whole problem, if you said, what would Downers Grove look like if time, money, and effort weren't an issue, it's a hundreds of millions of dollars project. So you're talking about decades. So when somebody says, hey, just build the system you should have, that's not wrong. But reality is it's decades and maybe generations before that actually is in play. And so the question is, what can or should we be doing in the interim to try and not make things worse? And that's, I think, for me at least, that's the driver behind trying to continue this conversation. I think it's an important one to do. I think it's important to find the solution to this low-level problem. It's pretty disconnected in my mind from the overall stormwater system. I think they're just really disconnected. So I'd be interested in what you guys have to say. I got more comments, but I'll save them for later.
Just, this may be unfair to staff. I'm thinking, can we get a slide of the chart from the October 10th presentation, which had the raindrops and the administrative burden as to how we got here? And if someone else wants to speak, I'll hold off till you get that, because that takes us back to how we got to this evening.
Yep. I think we can pull that up here in a couple seconds.
Okay. And I apologize. I thought about it over the weekend and I forgot to ask. But this is basically how it got. And plus, for those here from the development community, when the slide goes up, I want to ask you: are there any options we haven't considered, or are these the options?
Well, while that's going up, other members of the council want to jump in, and then we'll come back to Commissioner White.
I've got more.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm sorry, it's a subject that's important to me. Not that it's not important to anybody else, but I probably, in an odd way, think about it too often. Dave, I had mentioned to you, as long as you're over there scrambling for stuff, last week or the week before, that question about impervious area change over the last 10 years or whatever.
Yes.
Another one of the issues that I have with the current proposed ordinance is changes in impervious surface can negatively affect neighbors. Bill, you want to jump in?
Why don't you finish your thought, and then...
Yeah. So we're negatively affecting either neighbors or the stormwater system itself. So one of the challenges, it's not just neighbors, it's the village's system or lack thereof that gets overburdened by additional construction as well. But there's a ton of events that create additional impervious area that are not even addressed by this ordinance. And so I can't remember, we talked about it briefly, maybe not tonight, but certainly down the road. I think our staff can look back at the last 10 years or so worth of data and tell us we added X number of square feet of impervious area through redevelopment over the last decade. How much of that was a function of things that would be affected materially by this ordinance, and how many of those events, garages, driveways, patios, et cetera, would never even be touched by this ordinance? And that's an important piece of the question.
We have a little summary we could give right now regarding the growth in total impervious area in the village since we initiated the stormwater utility on January 1st, 2013. It has actually increased by about 4 million square feet, and that's an increase of about 3.7% since January of 2013. So about 4 million square feet, 3.7%. On your follow-up question, we looked at the distribution of permit types over the last 2 years, and we found that the permit types that are contemplated under this ordinance in the last 2 years have increased impervious area by about 230,000 square feet. But all the other permit types, like sheds and patios and decks, have increased it by about 141,000. So there are multiple types of permits which are increasing impervious area, and not all of them are covered under this draft ordinance.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate you running it down so quickly.
Okay. Well, we have the chart I asked for. Maybe a little hard to read. This is, if those are honestly, you want to go find this in the meeting materials for the October 10th, 2017 meeting. This is there. I'm going to zoom it in, and I'm going to try to discuss this too. This is a little bit of my understanding how we got to this evening. Village staff working with prepared a report to address the problem of stormwater runoff. And the conclusion was, and this is an objective engineering conclusion, is, again, if cost is no object, on-site detention is the most effective way of making sure that new development does not harm neighboring properties. It's the most expensive, has the greatest administrative burden. I've gotten some feedback by some people in the engineering community don't believe that's true as a question of fact. So before I make a decision, I would like those in the public who believe that staff got this wrong to come forward with your reasons so we can all agree on what the science is. This isn't about policy, about what's the best choice. And then the question is it worth the price? Because the data that I've been given by staff is that on-site detention is the most effective way to solve it at a very high price tag. Is it worth it is a political and policy decision. That's going to be a hard one to make. It has a rating of 5 as being the most effective. Now, the next two, connecting sump pumps to a minor drainage system, works fine if there's a minor drainage system that's adjacent. Well, one of the biggest reasons, one of the large objections to the on-site detention was there wasn't a public system nearby. If there's not a public system nearby for on-site detention, there's no public system nearby to connect your sump pump to either.
If I could, Commissioner, sorry for the interruption, just to clarify, that first item where you just described does include the very important phrase, with an outlet to an established drainage system. So our analysis says that if you provide full detention that happens to be able to fully connect to a system, that is the scenario that is the most effective.
And that's what works best.
Okay. That is what works best. Now, in our journey, we've learned a lot of how many properties won't really have that scenario and how many of them will be also challenged by soil conditions.
Right,
but that statement, I think almost everybody should agree with that. That's the standard way of doing it.
That is an important clarification. That kind of explains why we're having this conversation.
Right. If it doesn't work, the 60%. It's the 60%. So basically, I'll repeat this back. See if this is the right clarification. If an on-site detention facility can be directly connected to a public stormwater system, then that will be very effective at mitigating the impact of stormwater from new development on neighboring properties. The most effective. So really, the question that I think now, the other thing I just want to say about context, because fortunately I don't have to make a decision tonight because I'm not prepared to. Maximum impervious area, which is number 3. A number of the emails and communications I received talked about using this as an alternate route. And I would like to think about that and investigate that some more before making a final decision. But that's, so that also opens up lots of cans of worms we haven't even begun to think about yet, which makes that very complicated. But the way I see it is that we have a decision. We're at a crossroads. It's what they call a strategic decision, where there's pros and cons on both sides, there's no right answer, and we've been chosen by the community to choose a path. And that path is whether or not we're going to require on-site detention for residential lots. Now, there's some discussion as to what triggers it. If you build a large new patio, should that trigger it? And then the question is how much on-site detention, and I'm subject to change on this, but my thought right now is the amount that's recommended, the 100-year recommended amount, because putting in any on-site detention at all is going to be expensive. So if we require any, we should require the engineering recommended amount. If that's too expensive, it's, quote, not worth it, and we choose it's not worth it, then we don't require any. And that's this crossroads strategic decision with no right answer, whether we impose a requirement for... That I think really is the nub of the issue we're facing, is do we require on-site detention? And if we do it certain ways, and if we don't, we say it would work, but the cure is more expensive than the disease. And as of this moment, I've not gathered enough data or enough opinions to have decided.
Well, and I think that's very appropriate to say, because when we had these conversations, we were assuming that on-site detention could be done, would be effective, and would solve the problem, understanding that there was a significant cost. But there were two questions that, in fairness, we hadn't gotten to the point yet, which is why we go out for more input, is A, will it actually work? And now we're learning that, and the thing that strikes me is, at the cost of these measures, not just to implement them, but then the impact they then have on the property in terms of what else you can use it for is unquestionably high. That we know. But if the effective, there's 40% of these, 40% that may not work or may not work very well, then we've just arguably had a deleterious effect upon a property at an enormous expense, and we haven't solved the problem. And you're still going to have upset neighbors, and you're still going to have flooding, and so that was a colossal decision. And I don't think that factored into our decisions before, because we didn't have that information yet. We now have that information. The other piece of information that we had inquired about back then is, this sounds great, but to that point about balance, about balancing, preventing the problem from not unduly affecting the long-range economic vitality of our community, and desirability of our community, which again is subject to different interpretations. Some people would say a desirable community is one that has no stormwater. And others would say one that has high property values. All that's subject to interpretation. But we didn't have that information yet either, and that's also part of this, because I'm still, in order to answer that question of is it worth it, we need more information. But this isn't, we need more information and as an excuse to never make a decision. This is part, as I mentioned earlier, a deliberate process, and this is just the next phase of it. And there may be other ways to do it. I mean, we also looked at the this old house video and thought, oh, well, gee, that's easy. Look at that. If Norm Abrams can do it, it's done. It's easy.
Let me say one second. It's a very important point. You said other ways to do it. I think we're coming to the point there aren't any other ways to do it. We have to accept that we can't. So if there's another way to do it, but don't toss that out as, well, we'll think about it because maybe there's another way. I don't think there is. These are the choices.
Well, but I don't think, but my point is if we find out that 40% of the way to do it doesn't work, that's not a way to do it. I'm very concerned about that.
And that's where we got to look into that.
So my point is, it may not be a way to do it at all.
But and that's exactly the point, that if we decide it's, quote, not worth it, we're basically saying there's not much we can do.
And I'm not even saying it's a question.
That's just, I'm not sure I'm ready to do that.
No, I'm not even saying it's a question of not worth it. If it doesn't work.
Well, it works in 60% of the cases.
So I am really uncomfortable making somebody spend $70,000 for something that doesn't work.
And I'm really uncomfortable telling the community, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do about your stormwater.
And I don't know anyone in this room that's saying that. Folks, please, we're having a workshop, and I would appreciate it if there's no clapping, because otherwise when someone says something you disagree with, I'm going to ask you to clap for that too. This will really help our conversation. If everyone could please just let us have our conversation. I would appreciate no boos, sighs, clapping one way or the other. And we'll be just as respectful of you when you come and speak up at the podium. Are we all in agreement on that? All right, thank you, I appreciate it. Look, we're just trying to get this right. But I'm not saying anything now I didn't say a year ago. And now we just have some more information. And Commissioner, with all due respect, no one is saying that there's nothing we can do. We've done things before, we've tried things, and we're continuing to try things. I'm just simply saying that I'm taking it...
But you're saying there's these magic solutions out there if we just study it more. And there aren't.
No, I didn't say that.
These are the choices.
Commissioner, I did not say that. What I said is I have gotten information that up to 40% of the solutions we're being told won't work. That gives me pause. And for not to give people pause concerns me as well. Because I don't know who the heck would want to invest $70,000 of their own money for something that doesn't work. I don't see a single person in this audience who would tell me that they're going to spend $70,000 if you have a reasonable belief that it's not going to work. Because then you folks will be right back here in front of us saying, why did you make us spend that money and my neighborhood's still flooding? So that's got to be taken into consideration. I am not, under any circumstances, suggesting there's no solution or that we'll do nothing. Let's be very clear about that. What I'm suggesting is we have new information, we're having a conversation, we're going to hear a bunch of more input from the community here, I suspect from different perspectives, and then we'll see where we proceed forward. I thought I started my comments earlier by saying that 10 years ago we had this very same challenge, and guess what? We passed residential regulations that improved the situation. Nobody said it was impossible back then, but there was back and forth, push and pull to reach something that made sense within the parameters and the means and the likelihood of success. I don't see that's going to be any different process here. I said that at the beginning. I'm saying the same thing now. Please don't suggest that I am suggesting that there is no solution to this.
One of the things that hopefully everybody is seeing is that this is not easy. But at the same time, whether you go back 3 or 4 years, whenever we put those best BC BMPs in, I hate trying to say that. And we found out they didn't work real well. And I think Martin expressed that, that was an effort at trying some of the low-cost things to see what happens because they're a lot easier to deal with. But what that should tell everybody is that for at least 5 years, this council has recognized its problem and is trying to find a solution to it. I think we're all sitting here saying that saying nothing can be done is not what anybody wants to say. Just saying that it's okay to materially damage your neighbor from a stormwater standpoint is not okay. The challenge is trying to figure out how to do that because we do have some constraints. We've got constraints that the market imposes on us. We've got constraints that nature imposes on us. We've got soil constraints. We've got a lot of things. When we talk about discharging into a system, that's assuming the system can handle it. There's places in town without a system, as we touched on. There's places in town with systems insufficient to add a bunch of new direct discharge into them. There's a variety of things in play here that are tough to work out. My own 2 cents is that I think we ought to try and maybe refocus a little bit on the goal. The goal I would suggest to everybody was not detention or not. That wasn't sort of the goal. The goal was to try and find a way to reduce the pain caused on other properties by certain properties' development. And so finding a way to stay focused on it, maybe detention isn't the answer, maybe it's the answer in some certain situations, maybe there are other things, but the idea of impervious has come up lots of times, and that really, to me, is the point. That's why I asked the question about what kinds of impervious activities still cause additional runoff that aren't residential redevelopment, because they're out there and they're still as much of a problem. I don't know what the answer is, and we're not going to settle it tonight, but what everybody should take away is that we are all into this pretty heavy, and it's a push and a pull. And I know that, you probably could draw a line up the middle of the chambers tonight and have everybody come up and we'd have 2 sides of the argument. The truth of the matter is we don't know the answer, but we're trying real hard to get to one that we think we can all live with, and we're not going to ignore it. It's not going to be, the answer is not going to be to Bill's point, well, we can't do anything about it. That's not going to be the answer. There is a certain, I don't know who used the term, Dave, I think you used it maybe when you said code compliant. There's a certain sort of fundamental problem, right, with us requiring permits, therefore approving permits, and knowing full well those permits are hurting somebody else. It's a problem. None of us up here is happy with that. So we're going to try and find a way to get through this thing, and I still believe we can. I don't know what it looks like. I don't think it looks like this. One more thing specific to this proposed ordinance that I would throw out there for my colleagues. My intentions, because they were runoff related, would not align at all with the idea that interior work or dollar value based work or any of those kinds of measurements would be triggers. That just doesn't fit with my intentions for this ordinance at all. So, for whatever that's worth.
Commissioner Wallach.
Thank you. You will see me with my head in my hands. It's like a seesaw. I think one thing, competing interest, we see it up here. We'll see it out there. Bob, I think for years you were pushing, and maybe alone, I don't know, the idea of total detention, 100% you don't. And now I think maybe you're adjusting that a little bit, it sounds like. And excuse me, and I tend to agree. I think in our history, if we can go back, developers saw a piece of land, they built on it, they sold it. We have properties that were built on floodplains, and we have spent millions of dollars on purchasing properties that are in floodplains that should never have been built. Same thing with LPDAs, and we have rules on LPDAs, things that, we don't allow expansions. And I realize that, allowing expansion and development to continue and just adding price may not be it, and maybe it's not total detention on the property, but maybe it's essentially a do no harm, which is for properties that cannot contribute, or it's too expensive to detain all the water. Maybe rules that say you don't increase. I mean, the kickoff is when it gets developed, we aren't going to do anything if the footprint's the same, if you have the same impervious area. If you're not changing anything, then maybe you don't need to do anything, because the people that moved into that neighborhood went in there knowing what they were getting. So if you allow development, new development, but not have these extra cost burdens, but you don't allow, you can build up because you're not really taking over a larger footprint or impervious area, but if you don't increase the footprint, if you don't increase impervious area and you don't change the topography, like allow houses to be built 3 feet higher so you can dump some of the water on the neighbors. If you keep things the same maybe that's the answer for areas that, where it's too expensive to solve the problem. I don't know if that makes any sense.
If I could sort of tie together a couple of comments from the staff perspective that we've just heard from Commissioner Waldeck and Commissioner Barnett. The idea we went down with detention was really to sort of find a way to capture all the increased runoff due to a myriad of reasons that were causing it. We've seen some of the challenges with that. And now we've just heard Commissioner Waldeck talk about some of the other factors that are in play, topography, et cetera. So I just want to throw out the idea that there's probably 4 general things that could happen to a site when it's developed that could change stormwater runoff, which could negatively impact the neighbor. The one we've been talking a lot about is the amount and location of impervious. So it's not just the amount of impervious area, it's the location. Is it closer to the neighbor, et cetera? Is it spread out throughout the lot? So amount and location of impervious is one thing. The amount and the location of sump pump discharge, right? So depth of basements, location of basements, where does that sump pump water discharge? Third thing is something that Commissioner Waldeck just mentioned, is change in topography. How is the site graded? Is it pushing water towards the neighbor, away from the neighbor, et cetera? How did that change with the development process? And the last one is one we don't often think about, but one the folks in the development community often point out, is the change in the compaction of the soil due to the construction activity itself. So the idea of driving and operating heavy equipment on these sites for a year while a new house is built changes the runoff coefficient, or makes, compacts the soil. And so detention was really one idea, was try to say, okay, well, you can do all these things as long as you can capture all the net increase in your water and no harm, no foul kind of approach. A lot of the recommendations that are on this chart that came out of the Stormwater Floodplain Oversight Committee try to go point by point and address the actual inputs. So for example, limiting impervious area, that's trying to get at the source of one of the factors. One of the things that could cause negative drainage is an increase in impervious area, so let's limit that. One thing was change in topography, so let's limit the height of the top of the foundation. So you see the 2 different approaches at play. And what I heard is maybe there's a combination of both. In some scenarios, if you can effectively detain it, detain it. If you can't effectively detain it, then you have to sort of go point by point to mitigate against the negative impacts. Is that really what I was hearing from Commissioner Waldeck? If detention doesn't work, try these other things?
Just a thought, yeah. You do so much better than I do, Dave.
Nan helps me a lot. She is one of the top 10 in the country.
And that makes perfect sense. I mean, we should utilize, we used to talk in the old days about, I'm going to go way back to a comment that Commissioner Zabel used to make all the time about economic development. It was, you always want to have as many tools in your toolbox, so whatever the situation is that might present itself, you have many different ways to tackle the problem. Clearly, I'm in favor of having as many tools as possible to address the issue, because we all have the unified goal of not creating any new problems, which is how I think this conversation started, is we have enough to deal with the problems we have. And yes, we all wish Pierce Downer had settled in a different grove with better soil content, but that's not what happened. We have what we have, and people built in places that probably we wouldn't allow today. But we should use as many tools, effective tools as possible, to avoid any new runoff from affecting anybody else. And what we're just finding out is it's very complicated. It's even more complicated than we thought, but I'm convinced that we've got a lot of smart people in this community and a lot of dedicated people in this community. We'll figure it out. It just may not be that the 40% that don't work, maybe we take that off the table, because if they don't work, and to me it's a waste of time and money. I'm fully in favor of the ones that do work, but maybe to Commissioner Waldeck's point, we can look at it's keeping what does work and adding to it with other things that work, and it may take 5 or 6 things as opposed to one thing to get to a combined solution. Now, does that create more administrative headaches? You betcha. But I think that is worth it. I think it's worth, to me, it's one of the fundamental services that we provide as a municipality. And if that means it's complicated and we need to put the minds and bodies towards making that happen, then that's something I think we should do. I think we owe it to the people.
I'm going to just jump in really quickly to make it clear that I do not think, I really think it'd be very hard to impose on-site detention requirements on parcels that cannot connect to a public system reasonably and won't drain. because I think Mayor Tully's exactly right to make someone spend $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 to build a large underground vault that'll fill up with water once, and the water will stay there basically forever. That's just that's just insane. There's a very clear test as to whether that's going to happen or not. Is there a public system at a lower point that it can tie to? So telling where it'll work and where it won't be very difficult. So therefore, the idea of finding some combination, again, this isn't final, so those of you who are dead set against off-site detention in all cases, that's not settled. Those who are for it in all cases, that's not settled either, in my mind. But to require it where you can connect to a public system, then it's finding something to do for the other lots that'll have a comparable benefit without requiring them to build basically a water vault that'll just fill with water once and never drain. So the 40% is unacceptable, but taking the 60% out of the toolbox might be unacceptable too.
Yes, and layer onto that, I agree with that. And then layer onto that we also don't want to set something up that drives all the new development in the places least fit for that development.
That's true, too.
That would be creating even more headaches. So there's a lot of different complexity here, but I'm pretty confident we can figure this out.
And as far as going forward, I think the third line is an area of productive further investigation we don't have enough information for yet. That's where I think we can do the most future research to get us more data from the engineering side, not the policy side.
That's the maximum impervious area regulation.
Right. And side yard setbacks, things like that, yeah.
Commissioner Earl?
I really think that's the key here is the toolbox. Nothing's off the table, everything's on the table, but it has to be what is best for the site and what is most reasonable for the site in order to keep the neighbors dry and everybody happy. If it can't be on-site detention for numerous reasons, it needs to be something else. We need to do something more than we're doing now. So we just have to figure, and it may be just the case-by-case basis that all of these are in the toolbox and what are we going to pull out?
Right. It's always been said that the property is unique. Every parcel is different. There's no two alike in the world, and that may mean that the solution for each property is going to be somewhat unique.
Village attorney's having a...
What's that?
The village attorney's like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's what I just mentioned. So it does, we won't get into it tonight, but our research will look at the legalities of different tools applied differently and how to make sure we do that within the rules.
One of the constraints we operate under.
But that's part of how we got to this tonight.
But we
was
achieved the
an
same
attempt
equal
at simplicity. An attempt at simplicity of both administration and technical burden, because while it is expensive, it is also relatively easy to administer across all those different parcels. I don't think anybody in this conversation, going back to day one, has suggested, whether it's the Stormwater Floodplain Oversight Committee, this group, our engineering team, the building community, has suggested that what we should do is always do full on-site detention. That came out of 3 meetings, or 4, and our team trying to say, what might an ordinance look like? What might a draft ordinance look like that was pretty easy to consistently administer? It's way too complicated for that, and the challenge is finding that administrative balancing point. We could certainly do all of these things together. We might have a tough time doing them with the existing staff we have. And so that's another shifting of the burden. Is the burden going to be on the private homeowner? Is the burden going to be on the village staff? Is it going to be on the community as a whole with a higher tax rate for ramping up stormwater systems? There is a cost. None of this happens without a cost. A lot of that going around in Illinois. There are no fixes to this without a cost. And part of what we're charged with balancing here is who bears those costs at what rate. And that's where I think there's some imbalance with the current proposed ordinance. But this is not free. It is likely complicated, likely multiple aspects, and not free to somebody.
Commissioner Wallace.
Thank you. I will say that the 60/40 did give me pause, given the effectiveness. That doesn't lead me to any easier of a decision. I think we've got a lot of different sides here. We've got development community, we've got residents. We're here to represent the residents. We've received several emails, and again, everybody's mentioned the toolbox. I think we need to do something. We cannot do nothing or do what we've been doing because it's just not working, and I think everyone up here agrees about that. But quite frankly, I'm looking forward to hearing what the people here tonight have to say to help in some way potentially help us reach a decision on this or guide us in a direction.
Which won't be tonight, but
Which
on
will not
that
be
note,
tonight, but-
on that note, if everybody is ready to sit back and take a deep breath, I'd be happy to open it up for public comment. Anyone who would like to comment on this topic, we would welcome it. Please do come down to the podium, introduce yourself. We want to make sure that the folks at home can hear you, and if you're not at the podium, the microphone won't pick you up, so we do appreciate you coming down. Besides, it's a good way to get your steps in for the day.
Yeah, thanks.
Good evening, welcome.
How you doing? Mark Cosenza, homeowner in Downers Grove, 4609 Sealy. Full disclosure for people in the room, I'm also on the Downers Grove Economic Development Corporation. I'm not representing them at this point. Just to hear me out on both sides, because I'm here to help everyone find a good solution. As a homeowner who built a new home a few years ago, I had the pleasure of putting in a stormwater detention basin in my backyard. The cost is horrible, and it fills up and it does not drain. But I did my homework when I bought my home. I knew that I was moving into a low-lying area, one of the largest LPDAs, I believe, on the north side at least. But I tried to mitigate what I could, so my backyard was going to be fine. It's relatively okay. I don't have any complaints on it. I have my issue is that I spent a lot of money on something that doesn't work. I wouldn't want anyone else in the community to have to go through that. The thing that I have a fundamental issue with is if we're requiring detention on every parcel that's going to be redeveloped or redone or expanded by a little bit, you're putting a public utility burden on an individual homeowner. I have a fundamental issue with that. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I have an issue with that on my part. In addition, so you're asking a homeowner for an additional cost, but initially, but you also have to remember now, let's say you've done 8,000 remodels across the entire village. Now, you have 8,000 homeowners who are required to maintain that basin and any other additional runoff that gets put into the system has to be maintained also. So that's something that I would caution on even if 60% sounds good, I don't know if that's the best idea. Additionally, if you were to go to the route of 60% seems like enough on on-site retention. Even if you have put it in initially, if you are doing that and have that additional cost of everyone, I think you're bringing down home values across the board, whether they've done it or not. Because if the people who haven't done it, those home values go down immediately because you've added this additional cost. It drags everybody down because you have less redevelopment and less movement. Now that's based on some real estate expertise that I have. I would love for the village, if they're going to go down this route, to maybe seek the advice of an economist in order to see if that value difference would be true. So beyond, I think I've kind of touched on everything I want to touch on. If you've got any questions for me, I'm happy to take anything.
Thank you. That was a kind offer. We'll compile our questions and catch up with you at the end. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening, council, mayor, staff. A few of you know me. My name is Dave Mathias. I'm a builder here in town. I've been building in Downers Grove since 1999. Today, I built over 80 new houses and numerous additions and too many remodels to count. I've been firsthand for these stormwater meetings since I've been doing this since 1999, what the solution is, what the problem is. 5.5 pages here written of what my thoughts are on this, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details. I'm going to just stick to the area of my expertise, and I'm going to tell you why on-site detention is not the solution to this problem. Do I agree that Downers Grove has a problem? Absolutely. I'm a fourth-generation resident of Downers Grove. My mom will be happy to tell you the story of 1945 when she skated from Hummer Park to the Tivoli because it flooded and then froze. This town has always had flooding problems, and it has been inadequately addressed for decades. Long before development came on, we've had a problem. But I'm going to focus on the on-site detention. Some of the facts that were put up here that I think are basically erroneous. First one is the 60-40%. No one paid attention that the sample is 21. There were 21 samples taken. 40% of those didn't pass. I have a 10 of them of my own that I didn't pass. Why would I submit a report that doesn't pass when I'm applying for a permit? So the information's erroneous. The developer, if we're trying to do a dry well or some sort of on-site storage, and we do a perk test and it doesn't pass, well, I'm not going to give that test to the teacher. I'm going to figure out another way to deal with the problem. I would say the actual numbers from my experience on site, it's probably more like 80-20 or 90-10. And those that do work on site detention, I'm going to tell you a few stories about them. So in town, I probably put 40-50 dry wells in. I put a half a dozen rain gardens in, of which one that worked. The rest of them all have been ripped out since and no longer are there. And we've now been using what's called a shallow well water dissipation system, which is essentially a septic system for stormwater in the backyard, which does work but takes an extreme amount of land to operate. The reason on-site detention in a detention basin does not work is we have, as they mentioned, clay soils. They occur at about 30 to 36 inches down. I don't care where you are in town. Unless Pierce Downer dug his garbage dump there and you happen to get lucky with that lot that's been dug out and has peat in it, it's not going to perk. And when they do perk, no one asks, why do they perk? Because it's going into the neighbor's basement. That's where it's going. And there's some pumps working 24 hours because I just put in a 5,000-gallon retention system, and it's finding a seam of sand or an old farm tile or something underground, and it's finding its way down the block to the neighbor's house. It might not be the immediate neighbor. It might be 3 doors down. This is why you need to steer away from any on-site detention. I've done 2 of them that were massive, and they perked like crazy. The village code is between 48 and 96 hours. They're not supposed to perk quicker than 48 hours, and it's not supposed to take longer than 96. So that means all that water has to go somewhere within that 48-hour window. I've had 2 of them to date that have worked, and I've got 2 neighbors down the block who contacted me and said, why do our sump pumps work so much more now? It hasn't rained in days. I know why. Because the on-site detention is running underground and hitting their sump pumps. And that's why it doesn't work. The shallow well systems work because we're burying them in the top 30 to 36 inches of topsoil, which is black dirt, and the water will dissipate through those. But to get the volumes that you're actually asking for, the size of these systems on an average house are 30 by 60. That's the entire backyard for most of these houses. And the same problem occurs because you'll still hit farm tiles at that level, and the water is going to find its way out of that system quickly. If the land has any topography to it, they do not work because even the shallow well systems, they need flat land so they can dissipate. If there's tiering to them, it all travels to the lowest unit, and then that becomes overburdened. The top 2 aren't doing their job. These are the things that when you get these examples are not being considered. The drawing I got when we brought the developers in was a pretty little flat drawing. Here's the box of the house. Here's how big your detention is going to be doing. There's no topography on there. There's no 300-year-old oak tree in the middle of the yard that I'm going to have to cut down to put that detention system in. These are the things that are not being considered. I can talk about storm system in this town if you want to. I can talk about what I think it's going to do to the building community. It is going to devastate building if this ordinance is passed any semblance of what it is. In the meeting we had, I asked the developers in the room, I said, how many of you here have built a house in the last 2 years on a 50 or 60-foot lot? Everyone raised their hand. I said, how many want to buy one now? Everyone put their hands down. It's going to devastate building in this town. That's just for us guys doing new construction. Now we're talking about this ordinance is a blanket ordinance. Everyone south of 63rd doesn't have a problem because that was developed with modern stormwater infrastructure. There are detention ponds, runoffs. Even their sites were managed so that there was a big footprint of impervious that was anticipated that they're only using about 40% of. But now if one of those homeowners wants to put a little sunroom on the back and remodel their kitchen, they're going to have to put a $50,000 stormwater retention system in their backyard that doesn't even need to be there. Something that I don't think anyone's considering. You're impacting parts of town that don't have problems at all. So I just want to bring all those little items to point. I'd be happy to answer questions all night. I could talk all night on this because I've experienced it firsthand. I see what works. I see what doesn't work. The real answer, what you're hearing from the developers is, the first thing I think needs to happen is to maintain our existing system, which hasn't happened since 2006. 2006, we had a flood. The village reaction was to get a consultant to write a massive report of what's wrong with our stormwater system. It exists in your files. I read all 72 pages of it today. It's a little dry. I read it back in 2006 as well. It outlines exactly what needs to happen in this town. Is it 30 million? Is it 100 million? Yeah, it probably is. But we can start like eating an elephant, one bite at a time, start doing it. That's what needs to happen. You drive around town and you look at our main drains in this town. You look at St. Joseph Creek as it passes under Belmont. There's a tree growing out of the middle of the main drain of our town. It's been there for 12 years. It used to be a weed, now it's a tree. This is what needs to be maintained to increase the volume of the existing storage we have, which would allow the residents of this town to store their water, not have to store their water on site, and do like a modern community where the stormwater is all channeled and put into detention basins that are used by the community as a whole, not trying to sort it out on a case-by-case basis. That's what I've got for right now. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Actually, I do have a brief comment. This is the first really good explanation I've heard as to why an on-site detention basin that's not immediately connected to the public system might appear to work, but it's because it's flowing through an underground seam onto a neighboring lot. That's why it perks. Would those same comments apply to an on-site basin that was directly connected to a municipal stormwater main? Where, for example, there's a concrete bottom, a concrete side, and there's a spigot that goes directly into the public system.
The problem is, again, more erroneous information is being given to you. I asked staff when we were in our meeting, I said, how many of these houses are within 200 feet of a storm system? And they gave a number, and it was pretty high. I said, how many of them will it flow? And they looked at me blankly. Because the bottom of that basin has to be higher than the storm sewer, it doesn't flow. So just because there's a storm sewer right in front of you, doesn't mean your basin bottom is going to be high enough to let it flow.
Well, one of the whiteboard pictures they didn't show shows the different scenarios where the bottom of it is above, because it has to flow down.
It has to flow down. You got to drain the bottom of the bathtub, you can't drain it from the overflow.
Exactly. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Right.
But it just seemed to me, when I was paying attention to your explanation, that totally and completely applies when you're looking for infiltration or percolation to empty out the basin. But if you're looking, but if you can gravity flow directly to an existing public storm main, you can make it out of concrete.
Absolutely.
And it's not going to the neighbor's sump pump then.
It's how it's done commercially. It's how the village should do it. I mean, I suggest that every time we fix a storm sewer in the street, if it's a 2-foot pipe, we should make it a 6-foot pipe and then put a restrictor where it ties in. Because that's where you're going to get your storage. And little things like that, when you're replacing a pipe, the difference in cost between a 2-foot pipe and a 6-foot pipe is insignificant to the amount of work that's being done. But planning ahead and saying, hey, the next time we open up such and such avenue that has a 24-inch concrete pipe in it, let's increase it to a 48. We've just tripled that size.
I want to share two quick stories. Decades ago, I represented a condo builder who built properties on Pershing, and they had to put in an enormous concrete storage detention vault with a spigot the size of a pencil.
Exactly, so it leaches out slowly. Exactly.
And the surface was FlexiCore concrete that could hold a garbage truck. So he was yelling and whining about how expensive it was, but he did it. Apparently it works. The other thing I want to say to everybody, 60 years ago, my father-in-law, was my father-in-law then, moved out west from Berwyn. He worked at Hawthorne and works his whole life. And he always told us, when my wife and I bought our house in Downers, we looked at Downers, it's a swamp. We went to Naperville. I mean, that's exactly what he said. He said, I did not buy in Downers because there's water everywhere.
So what I think is, yeah, there's an enormous cost with updating and creating the stormwater system that this town needs. But let's start doing it. And yeah, and maybe it'll be my kids' kids that get to benefit from it, and hopefully they're still in Downers, because I'm the 4th generation, they're the 5th generation. Maybe by the time the 6th generation's here, we'll have started going down that path. But what we're trying to do is put our little finger in a hole in the dam here, and it's not going to work. What we need to do is bite off the bigger animal and start modernizing the systems in the older part of town. Like I said, you get south of 63rd, can ask staff. Their problems are they got too many leaves in a storm drain. That's the problems they have down there, because they have a modern system with detention areas able to take the water. And yeah, and if you look at the stats, I mean, all these reports are in here. They're capable of handling 95% of the storm events down on that part of town. You get up to this part of town, they can't handle 30% of it. Another fact that's not being factored into this is the roads are all impervious surface as well. And so to the fact of there was, when I asked at the meeting, I said, do we know what the increase is? And someone threw out the number 30%. Then it came back at 3.7%. But the roads are contributing this too. So if you were to balance that equation and put the amount of impervious surface our roads have, because they're contributing to this, it's probably a fraction of a percent that we've increased our impervious surface in town, yet we're having a knee-jerk reaction that's overwhelming and going to be devastating to this community. And so I really think what we need to consider is long-range goals, long-range planning. In 2006, it was laid out. And then obviously 2008 came. I experienced it firsthand. Got out with 2 nickels in my pocket, but I survived. But now things are going again, and maybe it is a tax. Maybe I'm not a big fan of the utility. I think it should be a stormwater tax. Maybe like the sanitary district, we should have a stormwater district formed. Maybe it should be its own taxing body. But you know, the village is responsible for police, fire, garbage. It's all outstanding. The infrastructure's been neglected in this town. We're doing a lot better job with the roads. This is the next step. It's not sexy, it's not fun, it's not exciting, it's all underground for the most part, but I think it's something that we need to be big boys and girls and say, we're going to make a 30-year plan, a 40-year plan, and every year it'll get a little better. And I'm sorry if yours is 12 years down the road, but at least it's on the plan, as opposed to doing nothing, which we were talking about here. I don't think we have to do nothing. I think we just need to look a little farther than the hood ornament on the car and look way down the road and start implementing a plan to get this community to that. And those are my thoughts on it. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for sharing those perspectives. This is what I was talking about, is we get the more information the better, because obviously they can see this is already influencing people's ideas on how these things work, and while we may need to very much go towards requiring that all properties meet a certain outcome, but not necessarily dictating how they go about doing it, which would be both legal enforceable and maybe more effective, and giving people a basket of options or a toolbox full of tools to achieve the outcome, which is really what we're talking about here, is the outcome is what we're desirous of. And how you get there, it may be difficult, it may require more administrative burden, but prescribing ways to go about it that are largely going to be ineffective makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. The only thing I will take issue with is that in 15 years that I've been here, I've passed a budget every single year as part of a council that has spent a lot of money on that plan that you mentioned in 2006. Maybe not enough every year.
No, I get it.
But we have been spending a lot of money. I can look it up in the budget every single year on stormwater projects. So the only thing I would take issue with is that it's not that we're not working towards those larger systemic issues. It just has to take time, and to accelerate that, as you know, number one, takes more funds, but number two, even if you had all the money in the world, you could not, there's only so many homes you could build in one construction season.
Well, and my point was, over 60 or 80 years it's been neglected, not the last 15. The project at Washington Park is outstanding. We need 20 more of them.
Don't disagree with you. Don't disagree with you, but
those
projects like that.
And again, I'd like one of the people to be able to talk. I could talk for 2 hours about other thoughts I have.
Understood, and we will get those 5 pages out of your hand at some point, because I'd like to see the rest of them.
Hey, Dave.
Thank you.
Dave, seriously, leave those pages, or send them to us. Or send them to us.
I wasn't kidding.
Or send them to us, really.
You just want to take out the little cartoon of Mayor Tully that you drew while you were waiting? That's all right. Super. Other questions or comments from members of the audience? Good evening. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Tully. Dan Greco. I'm a former employee of the village. And,
good to see you again.
Good to see you again, too. I consider myself a stormwater engineer from my work previously with the village. I was the development engineer for the village and also a project manager on many projects. I also helped to work with the village in formulating that stormwater master plan back in 2006. And I'm glad to see that you are moving forward with some of the elements of that plan. Like you said, it's an elephant at a bite at a time. You're going to get it done, and you've done some good work. Also want to applaud Manager Fieldman for his job. He's not an engineer, but he does a great job of portraying the information that needs to be relayed.
He stated at Holiday Inn Express.
Yeah, he did a great job. I want to echo, just to kind of, for brevity, just kind of echo Commissioner Barnett's cost benefit and stormwater utility tax comments. I also want to echo Commissioner Waldak's floodplain and LPDA issues, and state that if you want to make it a value-added expense, one thing you could do is impose a fee and then collect that fee, similar to things we've done in the past for sidewalk, where you take that fee and just incorporate it into the stormwater management fund. The reason I think this is important is, as you spend those dollars, as once an administrator on the stormwater side, you're able to apply that towards FEMA and the flood insurance rates. So if you collect that and you do that as a government entity versus having individual people do it, now you'll have some value-added expense on it, on getting credits towards each year your application, getting more points towards your community rating. Are you familiar with that at all, or no? A little bit?
Somewhat. Not
Somewhat.
as,
okay.
You've probably forgotten more about it than I'll ever know. But
no, that's okay.
Somewhat.
I mean, in town, you've done some projects that I helped kind of lay the groundwork on before I had left, where you had done, I think it was Second and Cumner.
Yes, I recall that.
So as you buy properties such as in those type of situations, instead of putting that burden on the individual throughout the community, if you find more locations like that as identified in the 2006 Stormwater Management Plan, then you go ahead and utilize those funds that you're collecting from the stormwater utility tax and also from developments, similar to how you used to have the sidewalk matrix and how we were collecting monies that way. Consolidate that into something that is much more efficient. So you're getting, not only making it efficient, now you're actually having something of value added,
right?
Because now you have something more efficient. And that kind of echoes what you said earlier, in a sense, because you were talking about making things more effective. A couple of options to consider in those improvements. The neighborhood detention is one of them. You did one at the corner of Florence and Ogden Avenue. That's back when you had Luxury Motors there. It was actually a project I worked on, and I believe we put in a 1-acre underground storage facility at that location, and that helped that location out. And that was very important that you did that. I think you were looking at it because of the potential development of that property, which ended up being a grocery store eventually. But the idea was you had it in the public right-of-way, and it wasn't going to disappear if you had it in the public right-of-way. And I think that was a great idea. We need more of those little things, not necessarily Washington Park, but more of those type of neighborhood where if you want to, kind of disperse your funds on building those type of things.
Right, and certainly as those opportunities present themselves, those are certainly things we pursue.
But you'll be looking at it in two different ways. You'll be looking at it in neighborhood detention, and then as Dave Mathias mentioned, he talked about piping. So you have a pipe. Ideally what you want to do is you want to increase the diameter of your pipe, restrict it, and then when you can build the detention basin where you can have everything flow fast to it, then you can go ahead and pull the restrictors out. So that's something you would do over time, just a consideration. And I had one last thing I wanted to mention here. Oh, side yard swales. 10 years ago you talked about, and this is very important because I helped kind of draft, back when I was a development engineer, kind of the things you're working with now, and you've kind of expanded a lot since then. One of the things that you already have addressed for your neighbors is making certain that other people aren't flooding as a result. I've worked on homes with, including Dave Mathias and others, in providing calculations showing that we have the conveyance in those side yard swales for the 100-year storm. So I think moving forward, when you talk about you want to provide detention on the property and everything else, we have those 100-year swales in place to make sure that water is not being pitched towards homeowners' properties and the topology. So what happens to the water once it gets to the street or it gets to another location, that's another matter, but at least we're not flooding out neighborhood basements or neighbors' basements in that regard. And let's see. Commissioner Waldeck, earlier you mentioned something about why can't we just go ahead and if we have a home and they have an existing square footage and they tear it down, why can't they just, if they build something equivalent, why can't they just go ahead and just not have to worry about anything because they're building the same equivalent size? Well, the stormwater, you have to adopt a policy that's equal to or stricter than the counties. And in this case, the county revised the word new. So before you used to be able to get credit, now you no longer get that credit because you have technically a new driveway, you technically have new roof surfaces, technically you have new things. So if you wanted to do that at a village scale, you would not be allowed to do that. You have to follow the county. Anything that's new has to follow those new BMP practices. So I just wanted to address those concerns real quick, and I'm sure Nan or others would have mentioned that too. So, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you sharing that. Thanks for being here. Good to see you again.
See you too.
Good evening. Welcome.
Hi, I'm John Economides. Live at 5206 Cumner, which is 4th and Cumner, just south of Pepperidge Farm. We've lived there since 1981. Seen a lot of water come and go. In 1983, there was a pretty big flood that brought the water, we're like at 4th and Cumner, brought it all the way up to our driveway. After the 2nd and Cumner retention pond put in, there was another flood in 2012. We saw the water come another 50 feet further down Cumner past our house, even in spite of all the improvements. One of the things that I'm thinking is I see a lot of two-dimensional thinking in terms of square foot and footprint and all that. But if you take, for example, like a 1,000-foot footprint with a 5-foot deep basement, you're talking 5,000 cubic feet of displacement. Let's say you increase that, you tear it down, you maybe increase the footprint 50% to 1,500 square feet, but you go 10-foot basement, you're suddenly talking 15,000 cubic feet of displacement, 3 times what was there before on the same lot size. So I don't know how much we're considering the impact of deeper basements. And our area has seen, and I'm shooting from the hip, maybe between 10 and 20% tear downs in our area with all these houses with the deep basements and the McMansions and all that. And you put that in a sensitive area that's already prone to having water issues, and you're just going to have more. So I'm not sure what the solution is. When they did the 2nd and Cumner retention pond, we were told that they couldn't remove the water out of there as fast as they had originally intended because it would have impacted things further down the line. So here was this wonderful spot to gather all the water, but it wasn't exiting as fast as it could have because the whole system wasn't robust enough to handle it all. So I don't know what the solution is. I don't know if you can build a new construction without the 10-foot basements, but I think we need to think more 3-dimensionally than 2-dimensionally. So just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. Appreciate you sharing that. Other questions or comments from members of the audience on this item? Please. Welcome back.
Hi, Rich Cullinane, 6825 Camden. I'll try to be brief because I know the evening is getting long. So obviously our whole area has this problem. Our large neighbor to the east, Chicago, decided to solve this problem with a $3.6 billion solution called the Deep Tunnel. And that goes to the city doing the right thing to put in infrastructure to stop dumping raw sewage into Lake Michigan. So they are doing the right things. It's making a big difference. Right now there's some 5.1 billion gallons of storage online with the reservoir and the deep tunnels, and that includes 3.5 billion gallons for the McCook Reservoir that just opened within the last year. I don't know if you remember, in February we had a major rain event and snow melt-off. What happened is that whole 5.1 billion gallon capacity filled. And the chairman of the Chicago Water Reclamation District says if we were to add the additional 6.5 billion that's due to come online in 2029, that would have filled up if it rained for another 24 hours. So what the city is saying is that, okay, this is going to alleviate a lot of the problems, in that a lot of the houses that used to back up with sewage and stormwater because they have a combined system, they used to get calls immediately. In February, they had something like 500 calls, and it took a lot longer for them to start receiving those calls. So that worked for a 20-hour period as opposed to a 1-hour period. So I do agree with the idea of fixing the problem at a larger level, But what's intriguing to me is what Chicago's going to look at next is to local and neighborhood storage as well. What can they do to keep that stormwater within a property and within a neighborhood? So I think that's something we should look at. This is a very tough problem, by far the most vexing problem that you have to deal with. I like the idea that a study was done in 2006. What strikes me is I think we need to bring some experts in. I have no idea who's on staff. Our staff does a great job and wins awards for it, but I think with something as vexing as this, I think it might be worthwhile to invest in some consultants who specialize in this, where 40, 50 hours a week, they're really digging into this as a solution to find out what really works. You know, X number of years ago, rain gardens were supposed to work. That was a good try, but it didn't work. I understand the problem with the impervious soil. You can't exit water into a clay area because, you know, they line garbage dumps with clay because they know it's impervious. So I would just caution us against a knee-jerk reaction because of public pressure, and do the right kind of, take the right amount of time and study to really drill down as to what really will work. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Good evening, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Jamie Calandrello, I'm at 5401 Carpenter. I'm a bit of a small fish here. My comments are a bit more personal to me. I appreciate the thought you're putting into this project. I know it's obviously very personal to everyone here, and something that has a strong effect on all of us. Firstly, I'm concerned about the way the village is defining a major residential addition. My husband and I are considering purchasing a home and doing some renovations to it. Those renovations would include approximately 10 square footage of additional footprint, but a full interior renovation. I haven't seen any compelling evidence that interior renovation of a home significantly affects the amount of stormwater runoff, and I don't believe it's reasonable to expect those homeowners to bear that extra cost. It seems a little bit exorbitant to me. Secondly, I think there are many beautiful homes in our community that are prime candidates for restoration, but the financial burden of renovating a home will become prohibitive to many existing homeowners. I expect there will be an increase in teardowns and also a further increase in large homes squeezing onto small lots, which I believe worsens the problem. Will the village consider methods that would make this process financially less burdensome for existing homeowners? If you take the fixer-uppers out of the mix, our family is effectively priced out of Downers Grove due to the large houses that are being put in. Could we consider, tax benefits, reduce stormwater fees over a fixed period for homeowners who choose to renovate rather than tear down and rebuild? Finally, I would like to see some kind of exemption or benefit for homeowners who add permeable surfaces or trees to their lot. I know that's not a common thing for anyone to request, but a medium-sized tree can intercept a great amount of water, and part of the proposed solution to our stormwater problem should include rewarding homeowners who choose to add permeable surfaces, trees, or additional green space. The rain garden assistance didn't provide enough incentive, but I think there are other steps that should be considered as effective and acceptable alternatives. If I absolutely have to spend $50,000 to manage stormwater, I would rather spend it on a permeable driveway that adds to my curb appeal rather than an underground system. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those questions for those comments. One thing I'll just add, it is that trade-off. In fact, it would seem to be disturbingly ironic that in order to put in on-site detention, you have to cut down all the trees on the property in order to do it. That obviously is not something that somebody wants to do. The other thing I just want to mention is, in a related context, the stormwater utility program does have the ability to earn certain credits for those that have different ways of increasing or handling stormwater on site through rain barrels and other things. Periodically, we talk about whether that program should be expanded, but that concept does exist in a slightly related but different way. So yes, good idea. Good evening.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and
council members and staff. And my name's Tom Giratano. I live at 4600 Oakwood, and just speaking on behalf of myself as a private citizen, but I have a whole bunch of neighbors who are here, and I wanted to thank Mr. Barnett, who spent a beautiful Sunday afternoon with all of us a couple of weeks ago, helping us understand the ordinance and some of the factors that are at play. And also want to say, I'm not an anti-developer person, and so hopefully you don't interpret my comments that way. I appreciate some of what Mr. Mathias said, and I support the ordinance. Would say I think it's belated and probably doesn't go not far enough, and I just sort of believe that longer-term solutions do tend to be the better way to go. It's tough to bite that bullet, but a big part of why we're here having this conversation is that those tough decisions didn't get made in the past. So I wondered, Mike, could you pull up those photos? I'd appreciate that. We need a little AV support here. And I just wanted to mention, and this was mentioned in the builders' comments, I guess, in that meeting. That's a good one to start with, actually. Where they said that, the ordinance would damage property values, and some of the comments that I was hearing were talking about, harm to residents, but it seemed like they were more focused on new residents and developers as opposed to existing residents, which are us, in our neighborhood, houses built in the 40s and even older. This house is actually over at Middag, just at Chicago, maybe about one lot in. So this is looking from the curb. Unfortunately, I don't have a shot that shows how close the house is to the sidewalk. But the house is nearly completely built, at least the structure, and there's a whole new foundation behind it. And I was talking to the lady who doesn't live where that tool shed is behind there, which is another property, but lives just out of frame to the left. And she moved in about a year ago. She has no idea what's going on that lot. I have no idea what's going on there. Nobody I've talked to can explain what's going on there. And so I wouldn't expect anybody to be able to answer that in real time, but I'd love to be able to follow up and just see, what's the process of approving something like that and enforcing. I understand one thing we learned talking to Mr. Barnett is just, how the staff is stretched thin trying to enforce things like this. If you could call another photo of
Tom, where was that location?
So it's, unfortunately, I don't have the house. So this, if I just go over here. So this is, I'm on Chicago. That's Middag. That's the first house on Middag. We might actually have a Chicago address, not sure. So it's the first house south on Middag. And this is, that's basically and so this is the backyard. Yeah, this gives you it's kind of hard to understand how that got approved. And if you go, so I think that gives you, that's the same property just from the back side. If you go to the one other photo I sent, it's over on Linscott, and this is actually an occupied house, and not a good shot. It doesn't really do justice to this basketball court, concrete basketball court that they built in the backyard. It looks, from that angle, kind of like a patio, but Megan, sorry, I don't have a lot of photos. Megan's my favorite, but it's a full-on basketball court that they built back there. So my main point is just, how we have issues in our neighborhood, some worse than others. Ours is not as bad as some of our neighbors across the street. But when they've undertaken remediation steps, we're talking to landscape architect about our property right now. It seems like they've run into big obstacles. I know they're cost sharing from the village, and a lot of villages don't have that. And I just hope that you'll think about us, maybe not original residents, but residents who've been here a long time and want to continue to live in this community and have it be a place that we all are proud of, and don't see our property values diminish, because that's part of what's happening. Basically, our backyards are handling water from upland areas being used to accept runoff that nobody ever asked our permission to do that, and it gets worse by the day because of development that's happening like this. So thank you for listening.
Thank you for being here and sharing that. Thanks for the photos as well.
Sure. Thanks.
Good evening. Welcome.
I'm Joyce Economides.
I also live at 5206 Cumner. And as my husband said, we've lived there since 1981. So we've watched a lot of what's happened through the years. And I think bottom line, one of the big things you guys are missing is knowing what truth is by experience versus by speculating what will work and won't work, and by what was speculated on that still doesn't work. And I mean, as you went through, I took 3 pages of notes as all the talking was going on. And it just really disturbs me because I look at how much money are we spending and what are we putting it into it, but it's not working. And bottom line, the one thing that really works is, number one, is to stop cold any new development at this point until it comes down to a point where there is some actual real life answers to what's going on. Jane Burns once went and said she was going to live for a period of time in a project. Well, after 2 days, she quickly backed out of that. And I think if any one of you had to be in an area that has major problems at the time it's happening, it might open your eyes to see what people are really dealing with. That's the thing. It's like all these decisions being made, but they're made a large part, even in spite of all the expert input, on speculation. I can give you story after story. I have spoken to the engineers of this village. In fact, at one point they thought I was an engineer, believe it or not, because of the way I presented my information, and I wasn't trying, to put something over on anybody. It's just that I'm not a stupid person. I look at things and say, if this happens, then this is going to happen. And for me, it's pretty obvious, and I look at this and going, why isn't it obvious to anybody else? So one example is you talk about putting in retention basins, and then, well, if we just hook them into the drainage system, what happens when you reach the lower points of that drainage system? It just means now it's going to be full at the bottom. It will not even be able to take in the people that are lower down. That's one example. We watched, like my husband said, the difference in floods, and people have said, oh, that 1983 wasn't as big a flood. Actually, it was worse. The people that were flooded from the ground up, there were more of them at that time. I could stand here all night and tell you story after story. And why aren't you asking people who have dealt with this for a long period of time? Like I said, I've spoke to people. They said they were going to fix it. One of them was from the 2006 development, and then we ended up with the lake down at the end of Cumner. And what was said was it's going to be a dry land area, dry wetland, and that we would have no mosquito problems. So this now is the onward going development of what happened. And we said, no, it is not. It's going to be a retention pond. And what was that based on? That down at the end of Cumner on the west side of the street, there was a ditch. And that ditch was never dry. And they said, oh, it's just because, it's because there's place. No, and we're like, no, it's not. It's because of where the water table was at that point. And that water stayed there. And in the pond, that's exactly what's happened. That pond doesn't go dry. That pond is a retention pond. And we were told it would not be a retention pond. Then there's further things about the mosquito issue, and I won't go to that at this point because that's not what you're dealing with right here. So I look at this and I'm saying, we're talking about people now having to pay money for floodplain insurance that never had to do this before and never had a need. We have been really fortunate that we have never flooded. We have once a month, we've never flooded. And, but I look at this and I'm just waiting for the day because of the results of what are happening through the years and all the changes that have occurred. And, so I ask questions like, what's impervious? So I laugh because right now we're being charged, even though we have a small home, we're being charged more money because of impervious, because we have a deck on the back of our house. The deck itself is pervious. It slats between the boards. Furthermore, the ground underneath the deck is pervious. So why is that counted as impervious? I look the same thing when runoff is coming toward our house. That runoff isn't being generated on our property. And so now we're dealing with that we're being penalized because of runoff when we didn't start it. Another example is we had a driveway put in close to our house. And we had never had runoff in an area of our yard after that driveway was put in, which actually was, you can ask me about later if you want. But in the position it started flooding our back door neighbors, their backyard. They had never had a problem before. That drained into our yard, which then drained into the yards also of two houses that are north of us. And so now we have a situation where this driveway was put in, but it wasn't swaled properly. It was not drained properly, and so where there hadn't been a problem, now we had a problem. So it's not just from building a larger house, which has now nice sloping things where before they were at a much lower level in general. So those are examples of where runoff is, I don't want to say highly overrated and also highly underrated from two different angles. The lot size, when you talk about putting in these retention ponds, when now the new house is taking up more than half of the space, where are you going to put a retention pond? And that is still going to ultimately end up affecting anybody that's at a lower level than they are. I already said that one. Bottom line, a village does become landlocked at some point. Hinsdale is landlocked. Have they lost their, have their prices gone down? But years ago, they put in a much deeper drainage system back because my in-laws' house there used to have some water problems, and they never had problems again after they did that because they did it properly. But they're landlocked and their prices aren't going down. If we have a village that is something that's welcome, that's not going to be a detriment to people that are coming in, and it's got to be really hard on the people that don't know ahead of time and then they come and face it after the first big rain, for example, you get a reputation for that. So my bottom line is, I think you guys need to look at this long term, and it needs to stop new development, especially where they're putting large homes, deep basement on lots. Like my husband said, displacement is huge. People poo-poo it, but like it or not, you put in those big retention ponds, now you actually have a bigger displacement problem, because what has to gather and run off is now a type of a vault that doesn't let water absorb into that area either. So now anybody that's in that position, that's not going to, we're losing more absorbable land, I guess you might say. So whether it's a larger footprint, combination of that with deeper basement, and you add more footage, we're losing absorbable land. And so that's all going to affect somebody someplace. And I know you guys want to increase what this village, you want to bring more business and more other, everything else and more money into the village. But when it's harming people, a lot of people, and like the medical, slogan says, first do no harm. And I look at it and saying, is your first concern for the existing people that live in this village to first do no harm before you start thinking of any other changes. So that's my big concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you sharing your experiences with us. Other questions or comments from members of the audience?
I do want to add one thing. I did speak to you all at the train station last year, and somebody was going to contact me and speak with us. My husband and I both did, and no one ever contacted us regarding the same situation. And that concerns me also.
I'm terribly sorry. I don't recall getting an invitation, maybe. But on behalf of whoever it was you spoke to, we apologize, and certainly all our email addresses and cell phone numbers are on our website. Please give me a call. I'd be happy to meet with you. And I'm sure any of my colleagues would as well. Just phone call or email, please. Good evening. Welcome.
My name is Jenny Garst. I'm at 52304 Court, and as you all know, I've been a part of this process since the beginning, since it started again recently. And I just have to say, tonight is really disheartening. I'm really sad to see the 60-40 statistic. I wish we'd had that 40% earlier. And I don't know, I think the key point that came out, there are 2 key points that I really am taking away from this, and I do think it would be a really great idea to bring some real experts in this area on. Maybe we could have avoided getting that 60-40 statistic after so much work and time has already gone into this. The other real, I think, key aspect is the do no harm. It's really upsetting when you see a small home knocked down and a giant home put in its place, and everybody knows what is going to result from that. And the people who are okaying it know what is going to result from that. I know we can't stop construction, but I have to second the idea of slowing it down and using some common sense. And when the people in charge are sitting there and looking at something and know that it's going to cause an issue, why can't there be some sort of freeze put in place that says, you know what, we need to talk about this further. And I understand that one of the ways of doing that is passing this new ordinance, but that isn't going to happen anytime soon. And I just wonder if there's something that can be put in place in the interim where we're doing no harm. Because as you all know, where we live, it's a major, major issue. And there is another monster home that has replaced a small home, and we're just about to get another monster home that is replacing a monster backyard that is just no longer. I don't know how to do that. You guys are the experts. I'm not on that. So I don't know if it's even possible to talk about that further quickly or something. So anyway, I really appreciate all the time and effort you all put into this, and really, and I'm so appreciative that you're willing to continue talking about this. And I wish I was an expert on this. But I'm willing to put my tax dollars and more towards hiring some experts who can really give us some real answers in a shorter amount of time. So, thank you.
Well, thank you for your continued participation in the process. The reality is that it again, 10 years or so ago, there were these twists and turns that took place back then. We thought we had solutions, and then we got new information and found out we had to make a little jog here and a little jig there. This isn't. I wouldn't be too disheartened. It is a process, and it is something that's going to take some time to get it right, and anything worth doing is worth doing right. I mean, I think what we're getting out of this is that there are some things that have come out of this that are worth keeping and utilizing going forward as part of those tools in the toolbox. We may need to have more than a handful of tools, but I don't want to jettison the things that we've identified that do work. I just think we need to steer away from the things that we're becoming clear may not work, because that just makes no sense. Anyway, yes, please. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. My name is Christine Hocking. I live at 4936 Montgomery Avenue. Been a resident for about 9 years now. I'm also a civil and stormwater engineer and the city engineer for a local municipality in DuPage County. So I have a lot of experience in this realm. My backyard also is a drainage area for about 12 homes, 3 of which are new. So we also get a lot of flooding in our backyard. So I have a unique perspective of being an engineer and also a resident who has issues with flooding and stormwater in our backyard. Looking at everything that's been presented here today and looking at the 2 objectives that were described by Manager Fieldman in the beginning, I think that what we have to look at is twofold. Something that we can do in the short term to try and mitigate some of these larger homes from being, oversized and over impervious area being constructed, and then kind of look at the long-term items. Some of the short-term items that I think from that list that was presented before, those 8 items, sump pump connections. Being able to connect your sump pump to a storm sewer if it is available. A lot of the complaints that I see in the community that I work for is nuisance flooding, we call it, and it's usually from a sump pump. Sump pumps go off after the rain event for many days, and they just create stormwater issues in neighboring your neighboring neighbors and everything. So I think at least being able to connect your sump pump to a storm sewer would be something that would be easily something that we could do in the short term. Also, impervious lot coverage, I was actually surprised to see that Downers doesn't have a maximum impervious lot coverage. A lot of other communities in the area do have one. So it limits the amount of impervious on your lot. So you can't build a house, put a patio and a basketball court on your house in some of the other neighboring communities. And I think that's something that might be easily passable and easily done in the short term to try and mitigate some of the issues in the future. And these two items will help guide maybe the future long-term items that some of the people have spoken today about trying to designing some of those neighborhood detention ponds, oversized storm sewers. And I think most importantly that some people haven't talked about is overland flow paths. So all of those fences and items that are in their backyards that are blocking drainage. People don't even realize that there's swales in your backyard that come from 10 houses up that are supposed to allow drainage to pass from one neighbor to the next neighbor to the next neighbor and eventually downstream. A lot of these paths get blocked. People don't even realize a fence, privacy fence, can block drainage. A shed can block drainage. So I think making sure that when we're doing these long-term solutions, also looking at those overland paths and making sure that the water can get to these detention ponds or oversized storm sewers. I think that's a very key element for that. So I know cost is always a big issue. I think the stormwater utility is a great tool to use. And maybe it needs to be enhanced or maybe the fees need to be increased to help pay for some of these costs. Also, the cost share program that the village has, it only allows for maximum reimbursement of $1,500 a property, I believe. And to me, that just doesn't seem like enough for the proper amount of work that perhaps might need to be done in these long-term solutions. You might need to see a little bit of increase in those cost-sharing programs. I'm not sure exactly what the amount is, but like some people said, if you hire an outside consultant to take a look at all of these issues together, they might have some experience in other neighboring communities that they've looked at all of these issues. This isn't, just in Downers Grove. A lot of other communities in the area have these type of issues that maybe they've already looked at, and maybe they can provide some guidance to City Council and staff. I know staff has looked into some of the issues in some of the other communities, but maybe a little bit more detail and information about that and tailoring it to Downers Grove specifically. So that's pretty much it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for being here and sharing your expertise. I have to remark, I'm always impressed by the number of stormwater engineers from other towns that live in Downers Grove. Maybe we don't need to hire any experts at all. Maybe we already have them right here. Other questions or comments? And actually on that point, we do have a Stormwater Floodplain Oversight Commission that looked at some of these issues a while ago, and interestingly enough, had a little bit of a different recommendation than what this council took up. So we have had some input on some of these issues from people who live and breathe in this space, but that doesn't mean that we decided to not go forward with still trying to find a solution. But I am again, once again, I have to remark on the number of experts on this topic that we have living right within our boundaries. Sounds like a good citizen project to me. Questions or comments? Other questions or comments from members of the audience? Now you're going to regret you showed up.
Dave Mathias.
Welcome back.
I want to make one quick closing comment before we leave. You heard from a lot of residents that do have problems in this town, and it is a real problem. If you were to pass this ordinance, or any semblance of it as it is, ask yourself what it does to correct any of these people's problems that already have these problems. Will it reduce it getting worse? Maybe. But does it correct their problem? Absolutely not. Their problem is still the same. If we stop building houses and build another house in this town tomorrow, does it correct their problems? No, it does not correct their problems. What corrects their problems is a long-term scope plan to resolve the stormwater issues of this town. So I just want you to think about that. But this really is a Band-Aid approach, and it's not going to help these people that do have genuine issues. And I want people to understand, as I am a builder in this town, I've experienced what you've experienced. I've stood in front of one of my houses and watched a 10-foot basement flood to the joists in less than 15 minutes in one of our storms. The homeowner called and said, "Could you bring a pump?" And I said, "I don't think I have a pump big enough for what's happening." All because of, it wasn't even development, it's just stormwater management. The young lady just spoke. It was fences directing the water towards their house that had been put up after we built the house. I just stood this fall in front of a house, and between the side yards of two houses, one we're building in a neighbor's house, and had water rushing up to my knees, enough of a current to wash me off my feet. I've seen it, I've lived it. The town has a problem, so I want you guys to think about what's it going to take to solve the problem and help these people that actually have genuine issues. Thanks.
Thank you, and it was probably worth pointing out at the very beginning that we're very cognizant of efforts that have been ongoing for some time to solve existing problems, including problems that existed since before we even had ordinances addressing these issues. Those are there, and there is a stormwater master plan that is designed to try to address those issues over time with the limits of the construction season and available funds. This endeavor, the one we're really talking about here tonight, was principally born out of a desire to, can we, if not eliminate, at least minimize creating future problems that then go into the hopper of things that we have to address that we already have. So we're very cognizant of that distinction, and the two meet, but they are very different because there is a whole program, as I mentioned earlier, that's designed to address over time, as Commissioner Barnett pointed out, it could be hundreds of millions of dollars, and it may take decades, but we are working on it. And there's only, even if we had unlimited amounts of money, there's only so much construction you can do in any one season, so it would take time no matter what. And we don't have unlimited amounts of money. In fact, topic for another day is there always seems to be some entity out there that's taking more of it away from us, making it an even greater challenge. But nevertheless, we persist. This was really, endeavor was how can we try to not increase any new problem or not add any new problems to the mix, but as we can see, it's a vexing challenge. But no one's shying away from the challenge. We're going to continue to work on it, and we really appreciate the participation and involvement of everyone here. I mean, just for my own accord, I'm hearing that there are things that work, and we should not discard the things that work, but we should add them to put them on the side of let's keep these things, let's maybe add more things that work. Perhaps there's a combination of things that can work, and we'll have to figure out how that would work in the real world with, we're really talking about individual parcels and saying you all have to achieve the same objective, but perhaps you can take a different path to get there. I don't know, but that I think may be something worth talking about. There's been some new ideas mentioned here tonight that either we haven't completely considered before, or maybe we did, but over the passage of time we'd have to go back and revisit. So this has been a very useful exercise, and we're going to continue at it. Any other final, not final, because obviously we're not ending anything here tonight, but for at least this evening, other thoughts, comments from members of the council? Commissioner White.
Okay. Just as a sort of going forward comment, hopefully I can keep these very brief. What I would like to see staff do is get us more information on the role of increased setbacks and the possible role of maximum impervious areas and impervious area restrictions to get more data on that. That may be a viable route. And a larger comment I want to make about the entire concept of on-site detention. For years, people have told me anecdotally, just do that and that'll solve our problem. People have been coming to me, so I think we have to have this discussion, if only to articulate in a broad public forum why it won't work. So if someone says, why haven't you tried this? Well, go watch the video from the meeting. This is why we have, if in fact, and my mind may still change, but as of this moment, I'm persuaded that on-site detention, when you cannot connect immediately to an adequate public system, could well cause more harm than good. Because you'll be, as Mr. Matthias said, you're going to infiltrate and percolate that water basin to your neighbor through an underground seam. So therefore, to have an on-site detention, and that's something that I basically learned this evening. But nonetheless, I can tell you, for years and years, people have said, on-site detention is a solution. And if we hadn't gone through this whole, and I'm not saying we're done yet even, but going through this exercise educates all of us and the public. So if someone says, why not do that? Well, here's why. And it's done in a public way. So I'm not ruling it out. If we can connect to a public system immediately, there may be problems with that still. But I'm not saying for sure tonight. I'm not saying for sure no. But to have it where you can't connect to the public system, I think that could well do more harm than good. And I want us to look at the impervious area regulations to find a package that has all the tools in the toolbox. That's where I want to see us go forward from here.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you, Mayor. There's been a lot of suggestions, things that we could follow, and fortunately this is on, this being recorded. So what I would like to ask staff to do over, whatever length of time it takes, people have brought up a lot of good ideas, some so-so ideas, and maybe if you could go through those and provide, for lack of a better word, a rebuttal or some ideas, kind of capsulize what's been said in some of the suggestions, why they would or wouldn't work, or what we've done or what we haven't done. So I know it'll take time, but I'd like to see something like that. Because as these ideas are coming up, I'm sure your heads are spinning with good ideas, and I'm just not, I'm not an engineer, so I can't really judge one way or the other. But the theme I got tonight is do no harm. Because, we've spent millions of dollars on stormwater projects, and we've done a lot of good work, but this aspect of it had to do with redevelopment and buildings and the problems created by redevelopment. And so I don't think we can get to the point where you can't do no harm, but I think maybe we could make a real effort to not cause additional harm. And I'm reluctant to use a word like moratorium, but if that's what it takes to save a neighborhood, because I do believe, the people who are already here and have been here for years shouldn't have to experience additional problems because of whatever it is we're doing or not doing. I don't want to create more problems for the people who are already here. If that means, stopping larger homes, deeper homes. I mean, you all came up with ideas like that. Let's keep things the same. Let's not do let's not create additional problems for the people who are here. And while we're working on a better solution, I know there's a better solution out there somewhere, or a toolbox of solutions. So I know it's out there, and I know we could do this eventually. I know, to say it's going to cost a lot of money, and if we do this, we're going to stop redevelopment and all that, and it's going to be devastating the village. Well, if you raise taxes enough to solve all the problems in one big hurry, you're going to have the same problem. People aren't going to come here anyway because of the tax burden or the fee burden, whatever it is. So anyway, let's not do any additional harm to our neighbors, and let's keep working on this. Thanks.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Barnett?
Just one more vantage point on it. Another piece of this that kind of weighs on me is we've been at this stormwater thing, which is a poor way of describing it, but since roughly 2009?
Probably 2001 with...
Well, six or seven was the study that started sort of a path forward that got revised in 13, I think, after that event.
Maintenance plan started in 01, I think, Ken.
Maintenance in 01, and then the infrastructure plan was 7 or 8. Anyway,
06, right?
Point is, there's a long period of time with a ton of work trying to develop a plan, and my point of bringing that up is one of the risks that I feel obliged to be considered to and think through is 2001, 2007, 2013, pick your point in time along there, we have been spending the money the mayor's talked about. In my time, it's $30-some million. It's probably 50 in Martin's time. But the point is, those decisions to spend the money, and whether it's Washington Park or it's 2nd and Cumner or it's 8th and Cumner, whatever they are, we make those decisions from a design standpoint based on a set of circumstances. And so when we invest, whatever the money is, whether it's the replacement of a pipe or the expansion of a pipe in a street, or it's we buy some houses, knock them down, and create a basin, we do it with an engineering aspect of designing for that, and we obviously don't design just for the moment. But if you take a neighborhood like the 8th and Cumner, for instance, there are homes all surrounding that could be radically changed, and all of a sudden the characteristics of that environment. So if the county comes in and redoes 55th Street, and over the period of 5 years, 3%, so over 15 years or 20 years, the lifespan of some of these projects before they're having to be upgraded, we change out a third or half of the homes in the area. All of a sudden the characteristics for that money that we spent, the public money that we decided to invest, we're sort of knowingly allowing it to be less effective over time. And I guess that's just something else that weighs on me. It's neighbors that have trouble certainly are not going to get solved by this because the troubles exist. Will it fix the next neighbors? Maybe, maybe not. But hopefully it will start to address some of these problems, including the preservation of the work that we've done to this point. So, I don't know, that's another part of this. That's why it's been so important to me, because we are, as the mayor said, annually approving $4 million worth of maintenance and another 7 or so, depending on the year, of infrastructure capital investment, and we're doing it all and kind of knowingly allowing it to get worse. That doesn't sit well with me. So.
Anyone else? I think the direction is to keep working on it.
We will take tonight's direction and input and add it to our 15 years experience with 4 plans worked on by 9 different consultants and at least 7 different engineers from staff. And we'll throw it in the hopper and see what we can come up with next. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we weren't under any circumstance expecting we were going to resolve something tonight. Obviously, we were having a discussion at this point. There was no voting item, much less even a workshop item. But we did want to have this conversation with the benefit of additional input, for which we are grateful for all of you being here tonight and providing it. It's been a very good conversation, and this really is something I know can be done. It may look different than what we've seen before. It may look different than what we saw tonight. But again, my experience is the residential redevelopment regulations from 10 years ago was a very difficult challenge with a lot of different opinions on what we should and shouldn't do. Some said we went too far. Some said we didn't go far enough. But as a community, we came to a solution that has worked pretty well. Not that anything can't be made better, but I'm confident that working together with all that brain power you just described, we can get it done. So we'll continue to do that. That's our commitment to you. I don't think we have anything else after that. Again, appreciate everyone's involvement and patience throughout the evening. With that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
Until I move the council adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. We are adjourned. Good night.